Good evening. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the City of Bloomington Plan Commission for August 14th, 2023. Just a quick overview of our agenda this evening. We'll begin with some internal housekeeping, and then we will get to our petitions. There's one petition that has been tabled, that is SP-24-22, Cutters Kirkwood 123 LLC. This is a petition for the property at 115 East Kirkwood Avenue. That petition is tabled. We also have a petition that has been continued, that is SP-21-23, True Storage LLC. This is the property at 1701 South Liberty Drive. There are two petitions that will be heard this evening. The first is PUD 18-23, Sudbury Development Partners LLC. This is rezone property at South Weimer Road. And then we will also hear ZO-29-23, and this is a petitioner of City of Bloomington Planning and Transportation Department. These are text amendments related to the required amount of ground floor non-residential uses in the downtown character overlays. So two petitions on the agenda tonight, but before we get to that, let's start by calling the roll.
Thank you. Enright Randolph?
Here.
Ballard?
Here.
Burrell?
Here.
Oh, will you try that again, Flavia?
Here.
Thank you. It's quiet. Let me see if I can figure that out. Okay, Seabour?
Here.
Cockrum?
Here.
Ko-Rodke? Here. Kinsey?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
St. John? Here. And Whistler?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing that we do have a quorum, let's continue. We have minutes to be approved, several minutes. We have minutes from the February 9th, 2021 meeting. Is that correct?
It is. Did you all receive those minutes? I don't think you did. No, you did
I don't
not. I'm
believe
sorry.
so.
We'll have to push them till next month. I was the one charged with sending out the email at the end of the week, and I did not include those. So we will get them to you in September. Those are correct. It was one that had missed, and when we were going back to make sure we had them all, that was one that we were
I see.
missing.
So we'll get back to that one
We will,
next
yes,
time.
we will bring them all to you next month.
We received it from Melissa this afternoon. Yeah, they were
Oh,
late
perfect.
today.
Okay, well, it's up to you if you'd like to vote, if you've had time to review them. Otherwise, we can push them till September.
Well, why don't we start here? We have February 9th, 2021, July 10th, and July 25th, 2023. Does anyone object to considering all three of those together? Go
No
ahead.
objection. I just have a Scrivener's error. My name is misspelt. When the newer person came in and was taking over, I'm sorry, I can't tell you the exact date, but that's it.
We can search for that and fix that. Thanks, Tron.
All right. So without objection, I think looking for a motion to approve those minutes with the correction of Commissioner Enright Randolph's name. Someone like to?
Excuse me, President Whistler, I think Commissioner Burrell may have had a comment she wanted to make.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner Burrell.
Yes, can you hear me?
Not very well.
very
You're very, very faint.
Oh, okay. Is this better?
That is better, yes.
Okay. The July 23rd, is that the special meeting?
Yes.
July 25th?
Yeah, I was not present in that meeting. Are we going to vote them separately? I'd like to abstain from that voting for that meeting because I wasn't there.
Okay.
Do them separately.
Yeah, we can do that then. Let's just consider them each separately. So let's just, if we could, would someone like to make a motion for approval of the February 9th, 2021 minutes?
Motion to approve February 8th minutes,
February 9th.
9th? Okay, then that might be another correction, just to make sure that it indicates.
Oh, it says February 9th on the
Yeah, I don't know which
packet.
is correct. There's February 8 on the internal. 2021.
Okay, bear with us here.
Oh, sorry, that should be 8th.
Okay.
All right, so the minutes are correct in the summary that we were sent. So February 8th, 2021 is what we're approving.
All right, we have a motion to approve the minutes from February 8th, 2021. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, and I think we need to call the roll on
Correct.
these since we have remote participants tonight.
Can I just a quick, I don't think I got a copy of the minutes. I don't know if there was a, or I may have also missed it, but
You're missing.
You're not on the email.
I'll just abstain, and I think there's enough. That's fine.
Okay.
We
Great,
need,
sorry about
we need 5 votes, right?
Correct. Yep. All right, so approval of the February 8th, 2021 minutes. Ballard?
Yes.
Burrell?
Yes.
Seabor?
Abstain?
Cockrum?
Yes.
Korodke?
Yes.
Kinsey?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
St. John?
Yes.
And Whistler?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Minutes from February 8th, 2021 are approved. So we'll move on now to the minutes for July 10th, 2023. Do we have a motion regarding those minutes?
Motion to approve those minutes?
Second.
All right, please call the roll.
Burrell?
Yes.
Seabor?
Abstain?
Cockrum?
Yes.
Korodke?
Yes.
Kinsey?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
St. John?
Yes.
Whistler?
Abstain.
And Ballard?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
All right, those minutes are approved. And finally, July 25th, 2023.
Motion approval of the July 25th, 2023 meeting, or minutes.
Second.
All right, please call the roll on July 25th.
Mr. President, I just wanted to state that that's the one with the corrections
Great.
needed.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Seabor?
Abstain?
Cockrum?
Yes.
Korodke?
Yes.
Kinsey?
Yes.
Smith?
Abstain.
St. John?
Yes.
Whistler?
Abstain.
Ballard?
Yes.
And Burrell?
Thank you.
So I think we got 5 there, right?
Yep.
All right. Yes, I apologize. I was not at that meeting either, so didn't feel comfortable voting on that one. But we made it. All right, all the minutes are approved. Do we have any other reports, resolutions, or communications from staff?
The only report I was going to give tonight, my name's Jackie Scanlon, Development Services Manager, is that the Plan Commission lunch session for tomorrow is canceled. So if anyone was planning on attending, you can have your hour back. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other reports or communication from commissioners? All right, moving right along then. We are ready for our petitions. First up is PUD 18-23, and I believe Jackie Scanlon is going to present.
That is correct. Okay, just a sec. All right, so we are, oh, I'm at the bottom here. There we go. Okay, so this is the second hearing for PUD 1823, which the Plan Commission discussed at its July hearing as well. And this is for a PUD at the location. The property is roughly 139 acres. It is the old Sudbury PUD being rezoned from that PUD to a new PUD, which is called Summit. And there is a small portion of a residential medium lot that is included as well in the little hook here next to Weimer. The comprehensive plan designation is neighborhood residential and is also in a focus area, and the property has not yet been developed. When it was the Sudbury PUD, some of the outlying properties in that PUD have been developed. So, for example, Arbor Ridge or Parcel O of the Sudbury PUD to the south, some of the Summit developments down there. So a brief overview, we discussed at length last time, details about the PUD proposal. They are proposing 5 neighborhoods. You can see those here with the 5 different colors, as well as new rights-of-way, the 2 largest of those being the connection of Adams from north to the south, shown here in blue, and the connection of Sudbury here in the red, going east-west. Last month, the petitioner indicated that they were planning somewhere between 4,450 and 6,000 units. Those numbers are not included in the information that we received for August. So that'll be one question we have for the petitioners, just to confirm what the expected build out of units is at this location. And again, last month, we were told 8 to 9 years. Some of the information says that, but in the information we received for August, there are also build-outs that go until 2043. So that would be a big change from what we heard last time. So that's something that we'll ask the petitioner to clarify as well. Part of this petition would be land and area for a trailhead and fire station here in the southeastern portion, adjacent to the city parks owned land to the east, and near this Duke Energy line that is an easement that will contain a trail in the future. And then there are also a number of environmental protection issues on this site. So one of the things that we talked about last month with the petitioner was that they had a number of development standards sections and a number of use sections as well in their proposed code, and they didn't match. So we asked them to use a more kind of standard zoning code format and have districts basically that contained both uses and development standards. So they have done that. They now have 5 districts that they're using across the neighborhoods. And so you can see those shown here in the different colors. R, RH1, RH2, MN, and MX. And so they are using those districts and their development standards and uses to fill out the plan for the property. This was an illustrative potential building layout that was in this month's as well, similar to the one that was in last month's, a little bit different, missing a couple of the roadway connections that we know they are planning to do based on this mobility plan that was included this month. So this is for roadways, and as you saw, I think comments in the staff report, has its positives and negatives, I think. We are still having 2 roundabouts here on Adams, now 3 roundabouts here on Adams to help traffic move through. And they did some changes to some roadway connections, for example, an additional one that was here on the north side. So got rid of some connections, one down here on the south side that was in what will likely be a tree preservation area. Something we have not seen is a connection to Weimer, which you heard from some of the neighbors. This is floodplain along Weimer, so a vehicular connection there may not end up being desirable. But we are still talking to the petitioner about potentially doing a pedestrian connection to Weimer there, something along the lines of extending the trail. So this was a trail and bicycle infrastructure map that was included this month. You can see protected bike lane along the 2 major roads. The roadways would be built to our transportation plan standards. So if we have bicycle or pedestrian infrastructure, that should match. That's something I'll talk about here shortly. But more particularly for the connections, we have, and the petitioner has worked with Parks to talk about doing a connection down to the south, again to a trail that already exists at this stub that runs on the west side of Breaking A Way. And then we and Parks are talking to the petitioner about potentially moving this trail onto their property so that it can be completed out to Weimer and not be waiting for the development of the farm property here still owned by the Sudburys. So you can see some other trail. It's kind of probably hard to see at this scale, but some other black dotted lines here, and this is in your packet, indicating some other pedestrian-only connections that the petitioners are planning to kind of round out the accessibility in the development. So one of the things that we highlighted in the staff report was that since we met in July, the department has been able to meet with representatives from Parks and Recreation and the fire department to discuss a potential land donation. So you will see in the in some of the exhibits that the petitioners submitted about 1.5 acres in this area shown as being able to be dedicated for the use of a potential future fire station, as well as a trailhead for the trail that is expected to go under the Duke line. When we met with those representatives, a question was asked about whether or not basically the entirety of this area east of Adams could be donated, because when you take out the 1.5 acres, there's not much developable land around it. And in the schematic from the petitioner showing the potential building sites, they aren't showing using any of that land. So that's something that we're still working with the petitioner. We haven't had a chance to discuss with them in detail about that. But the plan would be some portion of this property here would be donated, and potentially we would ask you all to consider including a condition of approval that when they went to prepare the land for Adams, that they prepared this land as well. That would help the viability of this actually ever maybe becoming a fire department location quite a bit if the land was ready for that kind of development. So that's something we'll continue to talk about with the petitioner and the other department representatives. Last month we showed this drawing and circled some areas of concern. So this one here at the bottom, as well as the one, the lower one as well on the right side, were both areas where we were concerned about roadways being shown in the thickest of the tree preservation areas, so that they have pulled back from development in those two spots, so that's positive. And then something that you'll probably hear some about tonight, there is a lot of concern from the Arbor Ridge neighborhood about the heights and of the buildings that are being proposed immediately across Sudbury. So one of the things the petitioners has put in the new draft is proposing some step backs of the higher buildings, as well as to leave some extra space between development and Sudbury. So that was its actual own special section in their proposed district ordinance. And so we have some suggested changes for them there, and that's something we're still talking to them about, but I think it's moving in the right direction of acknowledging maybe to pull off of that road a tiny bit if that's the desire of Plan Commission and Council. And then though the districts have changed, as you saw on the other map, I'm going to put it back up. So these colors don't match the map we're looking at currently. This area here that's red is still primarily for high density and some commercial. And again, the department is raising the issue that we think it's probably more appropriate for those uses to stay in one centralized location and have the rest be focused on residential, as that is the primary use that we think would benefit the community. So something to discuss here about whether or not the more high-intensity uses need to move east as well. So again, this is a little bit bigger of the proposed district map. So the R beginning districts are obviously the primarily residential districts, and then the MN and MX are districts that would allow or are the more intense districts. So just a second. So this may be kind of hard to read, and we'll go through it a little bit. So this is the same map indicating the heights of the building. I think it's kind of hard at this scale, and you saw you saw in some of the letters from the members of the public, as well as in some of the staff report, trying to break down kind of what these different areas really will be bringing will be producing in the subdivision, because they are all different. So the blue is the, I would say, least intense. It's called the residential district. Per the narrative at the beginning of the district ordinance, the focus would be on single family, including detached and attached, as well as multifamily of the style of plexes or townhomes or condos up to small apartments. So that's this blue here, which is immediately across from Arbor Ridge and also close to the existing environmental constrained floodplain area. Blue here to the north, again, adjacent to some existing, a little bit of existing Arbor Ridge here, and then some at the southern portion as well. And there is attached and detached single family immediately to the south. And then, and then a little bit here as well. So as I discussed earlier, they kind of pulled back on road proposals here and at the southern portion. So then putting kind of the least impactful type of development, the least dense development in those areas as well. Okay, so then we move on to RH1, and the only area they're showing for that is kind of surrounding here on the west end, immediately adjacent to the floodplain, and that is 3 to 5 stories. The R area, was 2 to 3 stories, or 4 stories with a step back of the 4th floor. And then we go to RH2, so gaining intensity as they go up, and that is the area here where the adjacent to where the fire station / trailhead would be on the west side of the proposed Adams connection. So by right, 4 to 5 stories, 6 feet with a step back above five stories. And that would be, again, in the northeast portion as well. Then we move to MX, and this was where we had this red area that the department has highlighted, I think now at both meetings, indicating is this size necessary for this kind of intensity to be brought out from the kind of center they're trying to create as well. In the narrative, it's described as high-density residential with ground floor commercial, structured parking, and shared parking. So there is 5 to 6 stories by right, 7 stories with a step back. And then there's a block portion of that here as well on the north side of Sudbury, immediately adjacent to the existing Arbor Ridge. And then MN is the final district, and that is kind of where they're looking, where they would like to kind of have their neighborhood center, Summit District. And that would be 7 to 8 stories by right and 12 stories with a step back. And so we just want to make sure, and as has been shown again in the letters, that we're kind of considering the, not only, of course we want it to be developed, but what those impacts will look like to the existing surroundings, and are they, appropriate. We want to make sure we're getting the scale as appropriately as we can. So again, issues and concerns, slightly different but similar from the last hearing. General PUD organization. The things that they cleared up with the districts was great. That's super helpful, not only for administration, but for being able to sell and talk about these properties, or for us to be able to answer questions from the public. It's definitely less confusing this time than it was last time. There are just a couple of things we'll want to go over with you all to get your temperature on. Unit count, is this an appropriate unit count? Based on documents we've seen, such as the Schmidt plan. And those are questions, to be honest, that we might not be able to answer until we have more information from City of Bloomington Utilities and the traffic study. It's kind of hard to answer those questions when we don't know the full impacts on the infrastructure around this project. And we spoke about that a little bit last month, that really those are going to be the two key things that we'll need to analyze and talk about with you to be able to address, what really is appropriate here, what can successfully be built here, not only from the developer side, but just from being able to be physically possible, to not have detrimental effects on the areas around it. So that includes the right-of-way connections, and then the phasing is directly affected by that as well. And I'll briefly discuss incentives again, which they have amended slightly, and the location of the different zoning districts. So with this little table here, when we're talking about the PUD organization, this is what I'm talking about. When these are headings from Chapter 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 10 or 11 here, and the way that this PUD has been designed thus far, each heading has kind of a different way that they would like for us to administer that section. So for dimensional standards, I'll start here. One of the things they've asked us to do, and we discussed briefly last time, but they've kind of zeroed in on it more now, is to give a date in April of this year and say, we want to freeze the UDO from that date. And numerous times, if you read through the district ordinance, they reference that date and say that they would like to use the standards from that date, except for those explicitly put in the PUD. And in some cases, in 2 of the sections, they sunsetted that and said, we'd like to use these standards for 15 years. And then in other cases, they didn't. So that's what this table breaks down, basically. So for dimensional standards, they're saying they want to freeze some from April, and then others they've laid out explicitly, which that's the laying out explicitly only some of a section is standard. It's the freezing the old UDO that's not, and while we understand why they want to do it, and they'll explain it to you again, I'm sure, for predictability, it's odd for us from this seat to kind of support that, because we would only be changing the UDO if we thought it needed to be fixed, or if there was a policy change. And so if we're going to do that for the rest of the city and not this 140 acres, that feels odd, I would say. That doesn't quite feel the way we've done things in the past. So that's something that we're talking about internally, whether or not we would even recommend approval for that, but I wanted to make sure that you understood what that was. Oh, sorry, I should have made this small. Just a sec. Okay, so for the dimensional standards, parking and loading, site and building design, incentives, and subdivision standards, they'd like to do a mix of the old and then their own standards. For the environmental and access and connectivity, they would like to just use the April 2023 standards. And for landscaping, buffering, and fences and signs, they want to use the April 23 standards and have them sunset after 15 years. So in the other sections, floodplain, which is governed by the state, outdoor lighting, operation, and maintenance, and then our administrative procedures and definitions chapters, they're fine for that to just be part of the UDO as amended going forward. Ironically, maybe a little now that I've just given this speech, that won't work with definitions because they've proposed a number of new uses, so they need to propose definitions for those in order for those to exist. So that will actually also end up being a bit of a mix. Which is standard. I'm not saying that we don't want to make it seem like they have to pick one or the other. It's the freezing of the old UDO that makes it more complicated. Of course, as part of a PUD, you set your own standards. That's the point of doing a PUD. But choosing basically now 3 levels of regulation to use, the April 2023, the UDO going forward, and the ones they've written, we haven't heard why that's necessary, I guess, in a convincing way yet. So if 5 of you are convinced, that's fine. We're not sure whether or not we're going to pull that out and make it a point to have them change that, but that may be worth discussing tonight. Again, as we mentioned, part of the comprehensive plan, residential is the focus, as well as being part of a focus area, as we've known for some time that this area was going to develop, probably within the life of the comprehensive plan. And then I mentioned the Schmidt plan, which is not a publicly adopted plan, a plan that was done by the administration to study this area on knowing, again, that this would develop at some time. So studied a larger area than just this PUD, but this PUD indicating single-family and multifamily, as well as some townhomes and apartments. So those are some of the types of uses we're seeing here. The difference is that the number of units is much lower in the Schmidt plan. It's about a third of the size of what they're proposing. So that is something I think that has been brought up a number of times, and so we wanted to make sure to present you with that information, and that may be something to get more information from the petitioner about. Again, we discussed this already, but these are some regulations that they are proposing to include related to the existing Arbor Ridge community and trying to kind of pull back from that slightly. Not sure that we're still working with them on the appropriateness of that, but that's something that you may hear about tonight. And again, the incentives, they have one of the concerns we had last time was that they were amending the sustainability incentives, and they are no longer doing that. So they are going with the sustainable incentives that are in the code and proposing modifications to the affordable incentives still. I just want to make sure there's no little notes here that I wanted to make sure to get out to you that I haven't said. I think, as I mentioned before, it's still a little bit unclear what the delivery dates are, just because we've now seen a couple of things, even in this one document, where some years say 2043, or we had previously heard about a decade to build out, but they're asking to have the development standards sunset after 15 years. So assuming all those things are already developed, why that would be necessary. And then, is the maximum number of units still projected to be what it was previously? And then we have some other things that we will communicate to them after this meeting about some of the development standards they've included we think should probably be changed. So for example, it's just kind of tedious stuff, and we can go over it if you'd like. But for example, the sidewalk and tree plot widths that they've proposed are smaller than what we require in the city. So those have to at least meet what we have. We don't allow Coles to Sac development. They aren't actually showing any on any of their road plans, but have written in regulations to allow them. So, why do they need to have those there? We'd like to have that removed. Also, some of the setbacks and the dimensional standards we think could be larger. For example, for the rear yard for attached dwelling, they're showing 0 feet. Sorry, so not, what is the reasoning behind having no setback at all in the back? Or the reasoning behind the chosen heights? So those are things we'll continue to talk with the petitioner about. We have not had an opportunity to do that since they submitted this final version. So we're looking forward to doing that later this week. But just wanted to draw some of those things to your attention. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure they have new things to present to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackie. Is there a representative of the petitioner who'd like to present as well tonight? Just step up to the podium, give us your name, and take it away.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Tyler Ridge with TRG Development, president of TRG Development, and managing member of Sudbury Development Partners, LLC, the group that took on the land. So appreciate everyone's time and continuing us from the first meeting here tonight. So we look forward to providing additional detail, receiving feedback, and going back to the drawing board after tonight's meeting. So again, appreciate your time. Can you go to the next slide, please? Is that better? Okay. All right, just let me know if you can't hear me. So in concept, this is one of the last opportunities for the city to take care of the current housing needs. It's really the largest tract left within city limits, and we see it as a great opportunity to take care of the city and the community's needs. We wanted to create a group of neighborhoods that promote affordable living, various of housing types, home ownership, walkability, while considering obviously connectivity, current environmental constraints, infrastructure, of course, and as Jackie touched on, we are waiting on a report that CBU hired out a third-party consulting firm to basically run through flow calculations and stuff. Andrew and his team understand much better than we do. You can kind of see the 5 districts and 5 neighborhoods. So there's 5 of each outlined there. It's proposed. You can see the large riparian feature in the center, and then the 2 main north-south the Blue Road, Adams, and then the east-west would be Sudbury. So you can kind of see those outlined, those 5 districts. So really, we wanted to, we set goals. So I think early on, we came in the first meeting and didn't really show you guys our goals, or our mission statement, or our vision. And really what we see as a goal for this is a community and development for all. So all housing types you can imagine will be here. So we're looking at condos, townhomes, single-family homes, market-rate apartments, workforce housing, affordable, you name it. We're trying to show it or allow for that use and do our best to allow room for that use. Provide essential housing for the Bloomington community. We wanted neighborhood services and employment opportunities. That's kind of what Summit or Everest District is allow for, a family that lives in the neighborhood to walk there, maybe see a movie, catch a bite to eat, and walk home. So that's a big deal to us. We think that'd be something that would be great for this community. Connectivity in all forms. So we want to be transit ready and transit friendly. So that's a big deal to us. We've met with Transit Authority, and we're actively meeting with everyone we need to make stuff like that happen. So we really want everyone to imagine a planned development where you're able to wake up in the morning, walk your kid to daycare, jump on a bus and go to work or walk to work. So that's what we envision for this property, is a walkable neighborhood. So the vision. Next slide, please. So the vision of Summit District is to provide a sense of place that creates a group of neighborhoods and promotes a mixed-use plan development. We're going to get into additional why a PUD on the next slide, but we don't see another way to do this. It's currently, we wanted to focus on affordable living. That's one we keep hearing. Workforce housing, we keep hearing that, and owner-occupied units, which would drive down affordability throughout the unit if we were able to kind of continue with this. It's designed to provide connectivity and benefits that strengthen community goals. We've met with Parks Departments. We're trying to create as much connectivity as we can, walkability, trail connectivity. Everest Center will serve as a community gathering space. So we've shown in some of our renderings, our images, large green spaces for communities to come, gather, whether it's a concert or just food trucks or anything on a Friday night. We foresee that walkable, coming to the Everest Center and enjoying your time with your family. The 4 residential neighborhoods offer a wide variety of housing. I kind of touched on that, but really our goal is to key in on the affordable and the workforce housing, which we believe is a gap here within the city and a problem across the nation, not only here. So why a PUD and why we believe a PUD is important or is appropriate? When we initially met with the city before even taking on the land, we had the understanding that this was within a current PUD. It is. We were tasked with going back and looking at, and after several conversations, we were directed not to amend the PUD, but to wipe the slate clean and start anew. So that's what we've done. So it wasn't something we just kind of plucked out. It was kind of a directive, and we ran with it. City support for infrastructure is a critical component for the development of this long vacant parcel. I know we're getting a lot of questions about density and height, and it's a double-edged sword. I mean, in order to pay for the main public improvements, main public infrastructure for this, density drives that cost. Density helps pay for that cost. So we understand the concerns, and we've been going back to the drawing board to take those concerns into account. But there has to be some density here to help pay for the public improvements. I mean, I think, like I said last time, Adams Street is shown at, I think, 1.4 miles. So you can imagine with 3 roundabouts, the cost of that and what the burden would be to the project overall. So we're touching again on diversity in housing types, occupancy, and price points is imperative to the city. I believe that's very important, something we're working the plan and working the verbiage and working the zonings to take all that into account. The comprehensive plan and Schmidt's visiting plan, which she touched on briefly, all call for the development to be in the form of PUD. We incorporated and updated current goals and strategy of the city's planning documents. So we've been meeting with staff and we've been making the changes as best we can. PUD benefits over straight rezoning. So to do a PUD, a minimum of 15% of your units have to be in and it could be owner occupied or for rent, have to be affordable. So that's something you have to do within a PUD that straight zoning you wouldn't have to do. Centralized community spaces, including recreational and natural green spaces. We had a map, she had a map up earlier that showed all the kind of set aside green spaces. It's pretty, they're large. I mean, we're taking out a lot of this development for natural, and it's something we want to do. We want to provide those green spaces for the community. Provides and enhances community level environmental features, so kind of rolling into that, and then public infrastructure for fire, alternative transportation, and trail connectivity. So now Travis Vincel is going to come up and discuss the district and the uses. Appreciate everybody's time.
Good evening, Travis Vincel with Summit. So we have 5 districts that we're proposing here, and these districts utilize 5 different use types over the neighborhoods. So we have 5 and 5, but they don't work exactly with the same boundaries. So when you think of a neighborhood in our community of Bloomington, we have different uses within the neighborhood. We might be there because of a long time history of an apartment building or a commercial use within that neighborhood, but we also design neighborhoods that are not all one type of use. So when you look at our district here, and you can flip to the next map, you see that these are the use types that are within those districts. So most districts have 2 use types that are used, which is similar to most our neighborhoods in Bloomington, have a couple of different uses that are used or districts. And then we have Ever Center, which is our downtown district that is just a single use district, but has a lot more uses that are incorporated into that district. So we use the 5 and 5 method as we set forth these neighborhoods. When we look at our mobility map, we then look at how those roads interconnect. And again, you can see the 5 neighborhoods and how those interconnect with the existing infrastructure of the expansion of Sudbury and Adams, as well as the connectivity, as Jackie so well pointed out, of alternate transportation through the neighborhood. And you see how we have a grid pattern that is now closer to a line to what other patterns were than not offset like it was. It's a little tricky because a PUD in Bloomington has a specific size that any one block can be, which is smaller than anywhere else in the neighborhood. If you take any zoning district and you say, how big can my blocks be, and you add those up, it's smaller in a PUD than it is anywhere else. So we've been able to do that with this radial design of the block pattern and able to meet that standard of 1,400 feet for any one block within the neighborhood. And you can see that the one largest block there is split between the Shasta Meadow as well as the Ever Center neighborhood. If you also then move on to how that interconnects with the bigger district, you can see how the bigger district aligns to streets, and you can see how we've drawn them on out there to connect to the west, north, and south, whether that's an existing infrastructure or planned infrastructure connectivity that exists within the transportation plans and the goals of the city. We want to talk a little bit about the transition of the site and from the neighbors to the north, specifically Arbor Ridge. So when you look at the planning documents, it calls for the district center, Ever Center, to be located in the central part of the site. We envision that the district center is within a 15-minute walk from the farthest edges of all the other neighborhoods within this district. So it's really essential that be centered in the center and not off to one end or other side, so that everybody from the entire development in all 5 neighborhoods can benefit. From Sudbury Drive, where that is already in a platted street, to the creek is about a 45-foot fall. So as you move down the street, between each block, it's 19 to 22 feet of a drop in this. So what is the retail spot you can see on our main street, as we're calling it there in the center of the screen, and you have a retail spot, that's below grade at Sudbury. So you see, as we get more dense in the center of the site and our buildings get bigger, we move away from and down the hill from Sudbury to the north. You can also see on this picture where we have stepped back additionally the floors 5 and 6 along Sudbury Drive there to allow for not a 4-story or 5-story building to be right up against Sudbury. If you also dig into the PUD, you'll see that we've limited the uses along there. So there is commercial uses could be there, but you're not going to have your sidewalk dining or your main entrance to your commercial spaces along Sudbury, we want those focused on Main Street. They might extend back into the building, but that's not where your main entrance is going to be. The main entrance is going to be down on our Main Street. So this is our attempt at moving that back. Currently in our plan, we only have 3 blocks in which you could exceed the 7-story base height in this district, and we're envisioning those being between Main Street and the creek, so farther away from Sudbury. We would like some feedback from you of how that would be, whether this additional step back of 10 feet is appropriate or not, so that we can craft our final version of how those larger buildings could set on this site. Again, we're very respectful of this transition. We just need a little bit more feedback from the neighbors as well as from Planning Commission on how that needs to look so that we can make sure we craft that into our presentation of the PUD as well. So where does that bring us to tonight? Well, tonight we are here for our continuation of our first hearing. Most times plans come to you and they get 1 first hearing and 1 second hearing. We're doing 2 first hearings. So we're in the gathering information stage. We're still taking input from everyone and anyone that wants to give us input on this. We're working with staff on a weekly basis to modify our documents and make progress, but we're still in the gathering stage. We're still wanting to hear from you. So hopefully today we'll update you on our changes that we made, but we want to continue to discuss and hear feedback from you. And finally, we would request that at the end of your meeting tonight that you forward us on to a second hearing at your September meeting where we can have more feedback from you and give you an updated document on our presentation. So to walk you through some of the steps that we're going to do now, I'd like Angela Parker to walk you through the ordinance. That's a legal document that is going to govern this development and walk you through the chapters as we've changed them since your last hearing.
Good evening. Angela Parker, counsel for this development. We appreciate you being here tonight and all the neighbors who are here, and we look forward to hearing from you. We were able to send to them our revised draft a few days ago, so hopefully they've had an opportunity to review it. But my task tonight is to kind of walk through that with you. We've made a lot of pretty dramatic changes. Jackie referred to some of those and did a really nice job outlining it. In fact, I think she did a great job with the table to talk about one of the issues that we'd like to present and propose to the commission is this idea of holding UDO standards in place for certain chapters, particularly in Chapter 4 when we talk about development standards. And so we've outlined those to hold standards in place as of the UDO's version of April 20th, 2023, for the life of the PUD, which eventually it will retire. That's the goal of the PUD. It's going to be a few years, and we think, I don't know, we hear lots of different numbers, but it's probably not going to be 8 or 9. It's probably going to be more than that. It's a pretty big development to get done in that shorter period of time. So we'd like to hold those standards, and we are happy to answer questions and talk about why we want to do that. We talked about it a little bit last time as well. And we're fine with sunsetting some of those standards. So we really do have 3 silos. We have, hold the standards, sunset the standards, hold them, and then sunset them. And then we have modifications that we've made and proposed as variations from the UDO as a part of our PUD with underlining zoning designations of the UDO. So if we walk through the chapters, and we gave you the handout in advance because we thought it might be helpful for you to follow along if you'd like to do so, and I hope that is useful. In Chapter 1, we've outlined these 5 new neighborhoods. I'm not going to go through all of that today because you can look at it, but it starts on page 30 of your packet or page 5 of the PUD that's proposed. And then we moved our affordable housing commitments to the first chapter. They were previously in the incentives chapter. It made more sense to move those forward and really talk about the premium that we're placing in this project on affordability. And so those were moved to page 8 of our PUD, which is 33 of your packet. And then we've outlined the phasing on page 9 or page 34 to 36 of your packet. So all of those things basically got relocated. In Chapter 2 is where we talk about the 5 districts that reflect the uses and standards, which we've really centered on. If we drew from the UDO on that, we drew from the RH and MN districts, and that's on page 11 or 36 of your packet. And then we also did change the development standards, dimensional standards, to be constant across the entire PUD. So that's a change from the current UDO, and that's on page 20 or page 45 of your packet. Next slide is on Chapter 3 and the uses, and we have designated those on page 22, which is page 47 of your packet, and designated only residential uses in Shasta Meadow, Denali Woods, and Whitney Glen. Those are 3 of the primary residential districts or neighborhoods, and expanded mixed uses both in Everest Center, which again is that Main Street area, and Blanc Place. We did include limited surface parking, and that was part of the staff report, so I wanted to just bring your attention to that on page 28 of our PUD. It's page 53 in your packet, but we've tried to create some standards that if there was a need for temporary surface parking, that it would be limited to the Everest Center, and it would be limited in duration and has to be shown to be necessary. So it's got time and size limitations for anything. And so surface parking will eventually sunset as well. Chapter 4 on our development standards and the incentives. We did make some changes in the compliance requirements, which is on page 33, page 58 of your packet. And also, as Jackie had mentioned, modified setbacks and height on page 34 and page 59 of your packet. So hopefully that makes it easy for you to locate where we did make changes. On the environmental, big changes there. We adopted the UDO and those standards. And then we are working on specific environmental features to evaluate and design that mapping that is going to go with that. And we talked last month about pinpointing specific environmental features of the site. And we are very comfortable and confident that we are in compliance with the UDO on floodplain, wetlands, and riparian. We're still in the process of evaluating slopes, trees, and karst features. So those are things that you're going to hear some additional discussion, and we're working on sort of pinpointing on the mapping where we need to have further discussions about those issues. But otherwise, work toward UDO compliance, and hopefully there as well. We just don't know the answer yet. In access and connectivity, we've got the reference map with our approved plan. That's on page 37 of our PUD and page 62 in your packet. So we've adopted UDO there as well. On parking, next slide, that is page 38 of the PUD and 63 of your packet. Adopting the UDO standards, but eliminating minimum parking requirements and then setting forth consistent maximum parking for various uses. So you'll see that outlined starting on page 38 or 63. On site and building design, on chapter 4.06, that's on page 41 of the PUD or 66 in your packet. Again, adopting the UDO standards. We did make some modifications in that section, and so you'll see not only some changes that are proposed there with regard to design standards, but also the transitional standards that Travis just spoke to a few minutes ago with the neighbors to the north. I have 1 minute. I'm talking as fast as I can. Okay, landscaping and sign. We've adopted those standards. That's on page 44 or 69. On both landscaping and signs, and also noting that we're trying to align zoning districts from the UDO with our 5 districts in the PUD. So there's some, you'll see some language for signs, for example, that we're adopting a particular set of UDO standards for the PUD. And so there are some changes with regard to that. A couple more things, and then I will be done. I think I've got a couple more. One is on the incentives. Adopting the UDO standard, there's a table there to see how they can be applied and how they're different. And so, for example, if you develop multifamily housing with both of the incentives in the MX or MN district, you've got to meet this 20% affordability. So we enhance the 15% to 20% so that we would increase the affordability in that situation. Last one on subdivisions, adopting the UDO standard and also set forth a chart or a table of standards there. That's on page 47 or page 72 of your packet. I have 0 seconds. Thank you for your time, and we'll look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from commissioners, either for staff or for the petitioner? Go ahead, Commissioner Smith.
Thank you very much for that. Presentation is really great. There's a lot of great things about what's going on, so I really appreciate it. When you say me, I'm, of course, interested in the affordability issue, and so I think it's really great. The question, tell me about, or say more about when you say the 15% is not concentrated in one. What does that mean? Can you kind of say more about that?
So the way we've structured it is, first of all, in every district, you have to meet the 15% affordable requirement. So they can't all be in the district center, they couldn't all be in Everest, they couldn't all be in Shasta, they have to be spread out throughout the entire development. Second of all, in the MN and MX zones, you have to meet 20% if you want the incentives. So if you think about overall, the entire development, you're going to have this ongoing total, right? That 15% have to be done as each development takes place. Doesn't have to be within the same apartment building or within the same subdivision, but it's got to be met globally and within each specific neighborhood, so that we end up with 5 diverse neighborhoods. If incentives are used, there's 15 or 20% affordable set aside within each one of those neighborhoods. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Mr. Venzel.
Go ahead.
Shown earlier that I can't find, and it kind of breaks down kind of single-family dwellings and other uses. Was that a planning document? You had it up on the screen earlier, Jackie. I thought that was extremely helpful, and I was wondering if we could be provided.
Sorry, single family
It just had a breakdown of what to expect in all the zones. Yeah.
Hold on.
The overlay of the, yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
I just thought that was a very helpful document.
Me
and
too.
You could maybe send that to the Plan Commission, that would be great.
Is that your only question? You just want to request that document?
Yeah, just requesting that.
Okay.
Sorry, but is this the one you're talking about?
No, it actually had like different uses kind of on top of it.
I had the one where I had the heights. Hold on.
I think that might have been it as
Okay,
well.
hold on just a sec. This one?
No,
We can-
it
you know what?
actually literally was saying single-family dwelling and things like that.
Sure. We can make both presentations available to everybody.
Awesome, thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Commissioner Kinsey? Go
All
ahead.
right. Okay. I have a list, but I'll start with environmental. I would like to have the petitioners at least address some of the environmental standards that were indicated in the Environmental Commission's memo. And if you can talk a little bit about their explicit comment that the purpose of a PUD is not to avoid environmental standards. And you know, that I appreciate the sentiment about the size demands the very best environmental planning, not the minimum, and I wonder if you could address that directly.
Correct. Yes, so we are still working through our entire environmental approach. Since the last meeting, we have visited the site with several members of the Environmental Commission, as well as staff, to walk the site and look at specifics. So when we look at the overall site plan, There's some competing interest. One is the connectivity of Adams Street going through and Sudbury versus the constraints that are there, specifically slopes, trees, and karst. Those things are there, they're fixed. And so when we have to build a street, we have to disrupt some of those things. We don't build streets to the top of the hill and to the bottom of every valley. That's just not the way we build streets for long term. ADA would not be able to use the sidewalks, and bicyclists wouldn't like them either. But sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. So we are working through those. If I were going to guess today, I think there are 2 areas where we have a slope issue. I think there are 2 or 3 areas we have a karst issue. And I think that we are going to save somewhere between 20 and 30 acres of trees, which is, I think, what is appropriate. We're going to do those in areas where they are in other environmental sensitive areas. But when we were walking with the staff and with the Environmental Commission, we talked about a group of 5 trees. Those 5 trees would be counted in the canopy, because they are 5 trees grouped together. They are 5 invasive species. They want us to remove those trees. We don't get credit for removing those trees because they're in the overall scope of trees. And when we count canopy, we don't count environmentally good trees versus bad trees, but yet when we come to save them, we want to save all the good trees. So those are a trade-off that we have to eventually make. And we're working through the details that it takes over this size of a project on where those are. What we have been able to say is the riparian buffer, the streams, the water in the flood zone, we can protect all of that. We can meet the standard absolutely in those areas. We have 3 stream crossings proposed. Those are currently will be complied with the DNR and the process by which to do that, but we can meet those standards without a question. We also, when we get to trees, there is this question of what's the existing canopy. For instance, in our UDO, if you have 39% canopy versus 40%, you actually want 40% canopy because you save a lot less trees at 40% canopy than you do at 39% canopy because we have breaks in what we save. So we look at tree canopy, and this discussion is going to come down to where do we want that connectivity and other infrastructure to be? Where do we want to save the most important trees, which aren't always the oldest trees or the well-established trees, but they might be the trees around a sinkhole. They might be trees along the stream that we want to preserve and make a decision about where those conflicts are. So I think we're well on our way there. I know that's a long answer, but that's how we're taking the staff's report. I would envision that between now and our next meeting, we will have our up-and-dated environmental report because our environmental engineers were on site with the Environmental Commission. We'll have that modified back to staff, and I think we'll get some feedback on that. But that's what I anticipate is we'll have a couple of areas where we say, okay, we have to make a decision here. What's the more important driving issue that we have to address? But we have no intention of lowering the environmental standards. And in fact, a lot of the things that we're doing overall on the compact urban form and allowing this many units to be here is better for the environment than some other ways where we might be crossing the stream 6 or 7 times, or we might be coming upon sinkholes in a lot more places and not being able to preserve large areas of trees around those karst features.
Thank
Is that
you.
helpful?
Yes, thank you. The other question I have is about, I'll just do a couple here and then we'll move on to somebody else. The other question I have is about the request to freeze, to use April 20th as the freeze date for this. And how did that come up? And I would love the staff's impression too about what are the problems with doing that and what trepidation, or if there's a favored approach to doing something like this that would get us to a better place. So I'll keep it at a question right now.
I think the most appropriate one to talk about when we talk about freezing is the sidewalks.
Okay.
The UDO has several widths of what sidewalks are, and we saw last month that you granted variances to the city of Bloomington on their sidewalks width in a development that the city of Bloomington is doing because it wasn't consistent. And I believe that the sidewalk widths and the tree plot widths in the city of Bloomington over the next 15 years will change again. I don't know which way they're going to go, but when we do a master development and plan development and we put in sidewalks, we would like for them to be consistent through our entire development. I don't think we're hung up on whether that's 5 foot and 6 foot or 6 foot and 5 foot, but we want to know that they're there, and we're there for the consistent long period of time. So that's what we're asking for, is take the code that we're adopting, and over the life of this PUD, which has an expiration, or 15 years in sunset, that we fix that, so we know. Because we believe that the people that want to live in this development and our residents want predictability. They want to know that if it's going to take 5 years to build out and there's a commercial building coming in next to them, that it's going to be built to the same standards that their sidewalks built to. We've all been in neighborhoods and seen sidewalks that don't get built along certain lots for sometimes years, right? And then they come back and all of a sudden the sidewalk's wider or narrower or a tree plot's different. We don't want that. We want predictability. We want to make sure that if you can put a sign up, your sign is the same size, it's predictable for the entire period. If you're going to have a parking lot of an office building, that there is a requirement of the number of parking spots that go with that office building that's consistent over the entire build-out of our development. So there's two ways for us to approach that. One is for us to write a new ordinance that says, here's what the parking is. And we don't really adopt the UDO, we just say, we're going to write it in specific. That's when you get the 200-page document or the 120-page document that we had a month ago, because we wrote those specific. We're good with adopting what's in the UDO, but we want to fix it. So instead of rewriting it and having a whole bunch in there, we're saying one paragraph, fix it for what it is now. If it's good for the city of Bloomington now, and if I were going to build a PUD or a development on a 1-acre site somewhere in Bloomington, this would be the rules. Just give me the ability to say, I'm fixing that for a period of time, and we know that that's what it is. There's others that's going to change, and so we haven't fixed those for a period of time. But that's our approach. I know it's not easy. It's going to be hard for us to utilize. It's going to be hard for staff to do it. But we also don't want to say that you go to building this development, and you've got this whole series, right, of UDOs. Because you could have a two-building site plan, right? And you build building 1 under the PUD, and 4 years later you go to build building 2 on the same lot. It has a different standard, and we don't want that. We want consistency.
Thank you.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, if the administration and the council decide in the life of this PUD that they want to change a regulation, hopefully we would have a good reason for that, and it would be for the entire town. We understand that in a PUD you get to set some of your own regulations, but typically what we, ask of the developer is, why does this need to be varied, and then how is this helping this development be beneficial for the community? Why does, this particular regulation not work here, and, kind of how is this still benefiting the community? In this case, it's mostly seems just for ease of administration by the petitioner. And some of the things that they've mentioned that they're worried about, like, for example, getting a site plan developed with 4 buildings on it, but it takes you 3 years to build it and the regulations change. That doesn't matter. Once you have a site plan and you start building, you're vested and you're good. So that's a non-issue. What we're concerned, what they would like to do, and I'm sure lots of developers all over town would like to do this, is get an approval and then have it be good forever, even if the ordinance changes. I don't necessarily think that we agree that a PUD allows you to do that that's the intent of a PUD, is to say, any site plan we do in this area now for the next 20 years, we want to use these regulations just so it can be predictable. We only change the rules if we think we're making them better. Anyone has an opportunity to weigh in on that discussion, obviously, at Planning Commission and Council. We feel like if there are certain regulations that they would like to write in that are different and they have reasons why, that's fine. If they're whole cloth taking in full sections of the UDO, that's not because they think the UDO is so great right now and they want to hold it. It's just for their own ease of, being able to maybe market or develop them. But I just don't know that that's a real, I don't know that it's actually that much easier. I mean, that we update the UDO every year. We don't make large changes in our development standards that we think warrant that kind of freezing. Also, this type of petition sets precedent. We don't want every PUD that comes in here now to say, here's 7, of your 420-page UDO, we want to lock in 375 pages of it. We just want to have these couple little things that we're willing to let change. That just isn't what the PUD process is for. It's for if for some reason our regular districts aren't working for you or our regulations, then you say why and propose a change. And that's not really what we're getting here. So we have been pushing back with them on this, and Mr. Wenzel says, well, we'll just write it all in and it'll be 300 pages. Well, then we'll just recommend that you take it all out, and that'll be a condition of approval, and we'll add an extra month if the Plan Commission or Council agrees with us. Like, we don't want to go that far. We want to have the discussion now and say, if you can give a valid reason and Plan Commission agrees with you, then fine, you can freeze it. But we haven't heard a reason that makes it make sense more than this just kind of makes it easier for us, that we could hear from every developer in town with every petition they do, asking to not have to. Part of it is it's an incentive to them to keep going. If you know that things could change or that, it is an incentive to them to keep going if they have a feeling that these things could change in the next 10 years with a new administration. We better go ahead and make sure we get this built under the rules we have now. So switching that and letting them freeze the rules for 15 years or in perpetuity until the PUD is built out, it's like a disincentive from our perspective to continuing the development. Obviously, they have tons of incentive to build this unrelated to the regulations, but taking the regulations off the table doesn't make a lot of sense to us.
If I may
Clarifying,
respond.
yes.
Excuse me?
Yeah, go ahead.
So if I may respond, we're not suggesting taking the regulations off the table. We're doing two things. One is, we don't want to come back here when we come to build a new sidewalk and ask you guys for a variance to build a sidewalk that complies with the sidewalk on both sides. The other thing we don't want to do is we have a process by which if something little's not working, you change it, and that is a variance process. And so that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about large-scale plan development where we know that there's predictability and stability in what's going to be there. We're doing it for our future residents of these neighborhoods, that they know that they can read this document and they know what's coming forward. They know whether or not there can be lights on the side of their neighbors' homes. They know whether or not there is going to be a sign in their front yard. They know whether or not there's going to be a billboard in these different zones. If we change the law or there's a court ruling that says something about how that goes, we could have an issue here. We don't want that. We want predictability. That's what we're asking for. We're not asking to avoid the rules. We're just saying if these are good rules today, and we all think they are, then we're willing to accept those.
I'll just add, part of PUDs are great for the petitioner and are supposed to also be great for the community. But part of the thing they take on is they can't ask for a variance. You're writing your rules and saying this is how we're going to rule. This is what we're going to build. So when he's talking about the sidewalks for Hopewell, he's talking about a waiver that's done through a subdivision process, and you all are allowed to do those. If someone were to develop in this development and not like the regulations, that would be like a district ordinance change that has to go back to council. So, they have to decide what they want to be done here. So, it is a big deal. This is why lots of people don't do PUDs. They work within the code, and we want to be helpful to them. This is a huge project. We just haven't, again, seen a reason beyond just kind of convenience, and we understand predictability is desired, to have this be to freeze any of the regulations in time.
Thank you for adding that, because that was going to be my next question about what is the process for making a change. I'm not going to call it a variance or anything, because what you're saying is that it's not an easy thing to just come in and then make an adjustment.
If it's written into your PUD.
Right.
So if you have something written in your PUD, then that's your PUD regulation, and that's regulated by Plan Commission and Council. And Mr. Rooker can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're saying what we have said in the past is that that's an ordinance, you've now written an ordinance for your site, and these groups are what oversee that. So if you want to change those things, you have to go back and change them, because it's not the typical Title 20 UDO regulation.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Can I just follow up on that? So you mentioned that if a site plan is approved, then that site plan is essentially grandfathered, even if the the ordinance should change after that site plan is approved. How long, is that forever? How long is that site plan?
So
good
site
for?
plans last for a year, and then you can ask for an extension or two of 6 months, either 1 or 2 extensions. So basically, you pull a permit within your year, and then you're vested as long as your permit is good. So we've seen at property, some of them last for a very long time, because as long as they have an open and good building permit with the building department, then the site plan is still good.
So just follow-up question for the petitioner. What's your expectation as far as getting to site plans? I mean, do you expect to have one big master site plan, or are these going to just be
No,
rolling in
this-
year after year as you want to develop one neighborhood
Yeah.
to the next or one block to the next?
We think this is a 10 to 15-year development process. That's why we are sunsetting these at 15 years. The way the PUD works, it's 90% developed is what point in time the PUD retires. So it could be a long time. And we don't anticipate coming in with a massive site plan that gets the whole thing done. We think this will come as neighborhoods in small sections, and that's where we're asking for consistency. And I think that what staff's missing is if we defer to the UDO, then it is a variance process. If the sidewalks are the UDO process, and we have an existing sidewalk of 4, and we're not in the PUD ordinance, we're operating in the UDO, we would be asking for a variance. We would be going through the variance process because we're acting within the UDO. And that's what we're saying. We don't want to have to come to you because the UDO changed and we're acting within the UDO for the sidewalk. We want to say, tell us what it is, and now we can build to that. So that's what we're worried about is when you go to the UDO, then those processes do take place. That, we're not building to that, it's a variance. When I change my business and I get a new sign, that's the ordinance. If that ordinance is dictating that and we change the signs and they all have to be crimson and cream in Bloomington, then I'm going to come for a variance because that's the process in the UDO. So that's what we're trying to avoid, to be having to come to the UDO for a variance when it's the standard that we tried to establish initially.
Thank you.
Hopefully that helps. But
It's so confusing. I just want to,
it's hard.
I'm just going to, if the PUD is silent on something that lives in the UDO, then that is a UDO process and you can request a variance from that. If they don't address signs at all, but say our underlining zoning district here is MM, and then they come in for a sign that's too big, they can request a variance for that sign. If they're saying, we want to use the UDO regulation from April 23rd, 2023, they're like codifying that into their PUD. So those things, I believe, and Mike will correct me if I'm wrong, are not going to be variance eligible because they're part of the PUD. You should only put things in the PUD you're sure you want to do.
It would be as if you had copied and pasted the UDO into the PUD ordinance.
Then you would not
and
be
it is locked in.
variance eligible for those items, I believe.
Yeah, just Mike Rover, city attorney, just agreeing with Jack, who's talking about it for a second.
Yep, okay, thank you. Other questions? Commissioner Cochran, go ahead.
Just to tag up, we're talking about code and regulations, but as we go through and we might have second generation, maybe retail space or office space, and looking at the list of uses, and we're in a PUD, and we want to, and the use that we want to propose is not there. And you typically in a PUD, we would do a request to add that use to it. But since they're mirroring our current zoning, how would that be addressed?
Good question. So they have included some language, and legal has not reviewed this yet, but they have included some language that is similar to language in the UDO that indicates if a land use isn't explicitly in the table, then it's up to the director to make a determination according to some standards that we have. So that's something we have in the UDO. If you're proposing something that we can't find an exact match for, then Director Robinson can find something similar. So they're proposing to carry that in.
Okay, and another question. We've got a handful of PUDs right now. Mm-hmm. How do we deal with code within those PUDs and changes in our UDO code?
Okay, so the UDO says for the transition standards that if you have a PUD and it's silent on a particular topic, then you go to current UDO to regulate that topic.
Okay, great, thank you.
Just a question for the petitioner. I appreciate the time and the energy and the clarification. This new packet, the updates help a lot. I think the vision coming into specifically, when you guys are looking at the Everest Center, I'm kind of wondering more about, what specifically do you see kind of going in there for commercial retail spaces? And also the opportunity for not just these the developing neighborhoods around here, but do you see it as something that a lot of the West Side residents of Bloomington could also access and use? Because I think that's part of the density issue. I think in the height issue also has to take into account, I think, what's the larger impact on the community given the amenities you guys are trying to put in there. So do you guys have any just basic ideas of what would go in there and what that would look like?
So far, we have our list of things we'd like to see, which is lots of entertainment and active space. But we have had interest from medical office, we've had hotelier interest, senior living interest that we all see focused in that Everest Center district. So we see entertainment, services, small services, daycare, banks, those kind of things, as well as larger community servicing, entertainment type things, hotels, medical office, and senior living and assisted living.
Thank you.
Just to tag on to that, do you have a threshold? You're doing this in phases, so residential probably first. Do you have a threshold of a number of units before you start building commercial space, or is it simultaneous, or the market driven, or?
So we don't have a threshold to say we would start building or sell a commercial lot or part of a commercial lot after X. We have put in a phasing schedule that's in the PD that talks about starting from the west and the east and essentially setting goals of the number of units so that we weren't skipping all over the site. So you essentially had to develop either one of the first two neighborhoods completely or about 50% of their goal before you could go to a third and before you could go to a fourth. Now that third might be another residential neighborhood or it might be the mixed use neighborhood, but to have some flexibility, but yet predictability on how that was going to take place. So we see that, if you get to about 50% of one of those two neighborhoods or one whole neighborhood, then it's probably to the place that it could start supporting some commercial uses in that area as well, which also gives time for some of the other infrastructure to take place as well.
Perfect. Okay, thanks.
All right, Commissioner Smith.
Another one from Mr. Vincel. Don't sit down. I kind of know, I kind of guess what you're thinking. Tell me what the practical effects would be if, there were interruptions in the UDO or the new administration is going to come in, and if everything's different for a developer, what's the practical, implications of that? What does that mean?
So with a PD, the process is 2 hearings at Plan Commission, 2 hearings at City Council for any changes to that PD. So we would have the same process that we're currently go through would be the process. So that's a 6 to 9 month process to change something here. You could actually change the UDO faster than you could change the PUD.
Yeah, so I guess what I was trying to get at, are there negative implications to development? Does it lengthen the process of finishing the project? Does it cost more? I know that at council we had some things that got kind of stuck in a hamster wheel, and it did take a really long time to kind of come resolve it. And so I just thought I'd give you an opportunity to say what effects that might have on the development of, it's a grand project.
So I think it would less cost us more money, which in turn increases the cost of the project and increases the cost of housing in Bloomington. Yes, it would take longer to develop. I think the more important thing is we might lose some potential clients that will go, whether that's to another place in Bloomington or go somewhere outside of Bloomington. If someone came to me and said, I would like to do X, and I say, well, that's an amendment of the PD, in general, they're going to say, would I have to do that somewhere else, be it, along the 69 corridor, and that might make a decision of where they chose to put their investment, and that's what we would hate to see.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is, first question just for Ms. Scanlon, could you just talk about that length in making a change with the UDO versus a PUD that Mr. Wenzel just?
Sure, I think it just depends on the content, right? So we've seen PUD amendments where they request a waiver of second hearing, they go to Plan Commission once and go to council. You have to do first reading, but you don't actually go to that meeting, and then second reading at council. So it would depend on the complexity of the question, I think, is similar.
It's similar.
I'm sorry. I think it could be, it would not be, I don't think, if it was not something complex, it wouldn't be this 3 or 4 hearings or whatever we're having now. It would be 1 or 2 hearings. And we have seen those that are not complex do 1 hearing at Plan Commission and then 1 at council.
Okay. And then for Mr. Wenzel, can you speak to the massing across from Arbor Ridge along Sudbury and how that feels to you, given feedback both from staff and I think some of the neighbors of having, I know it's stepped back, but can you talk about that?
So let's step back a little bit and say, let's say we were going to zone this property 1 land use that we would have out there. It would probably be RH. It would probably be residential high density to get as much density as we could get there and not worry about mixtures. So the entire site, if we did 1 district, we'd also have to do 1 district because we don't have parcels or streets to divide it, would be 5 stories and with incentive 6, because that's what is by right in the RH zone. So we've chose not to do that. We've chose to have higher buildings, smaller buildings. We've chose to spread that density out so we have variation. So across the street from Sudbury, which is a platted street, we're proposing, as we step down the hill, to start with buildings that are 4 stories with an additional step back. So not the 5 stories that we would think about, but 4 stories with additional step back. And then as we move down the hill, for that to get greater. We envision that being 100-foot right-of-way, 80-foot right-of-way, and then 100 feet from property line to property line for that step back. So that when you're above the project looking at it, you're seeing 3- and 4-story buildings, not 6- and 7-story buildings, which are down on the other side of the street as the hill goes down. We're looking at ways of where if you use a 20% affordable and you're able to get your additional height, where we would locate those within. So our current thinking is, can we move those away from Sudbury as well, so that more dense, more massing is farther down the hill, not only lower in elevation, but also farther from the existing development that's currently there. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think it does. So the 5th floor and 6th floor with an incentive, but it would be step back 10 feet, is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you mentioned affordable housing, I did want to ask about that. So you said it's 15% throughout by neighborhood, is that right?
Each neighborhood has to have 15%, not
Okay.
each development.
Right, sorry,
Yeah,
each
so
neighborhood.
each
Right,
neighborhood,
right.
and not
then
each
it's-
zoning district.
Okay, and then it's 20% in MS and MX with, if they want,
If you want to
incentive.
use the incentive.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm thinking about just the impact of that on the community. As Mr. Ridge mentioned, this impacting for the better our affordable housing needs. So the 6,000 units, is that like a fairly good number? Because 900 units, 15%, it's a substantial number of affordable housing units. I have questions too about how this is done, but just that as a fact and as an impact on the community. Can you just talk about that? Is that right? Is it right to assume that we might see 900 affordable housing units out of this? Is that 6,000 kind of mushy, or it's pretty good?
We think 6,000 is a little mushy. What is that? We're probably more like about 5,000, truthfully. That's about where we're falling right now. We're continuing to look at all the different pressures that are putting on us. So we think we're at about 5,000, so it'd be a little less than 900, but yes, that's where we're looking.
Okay.
While we're on affordable housing, one of the things we'd like feedback from is there extra incentive? Currently, affordable housing, you get that incentive at 120% AMI and less. So if the homeowner or renter is at 120% of AMI, you get that credit for that being affordable. What we have explored in the PUD is getting additional credit if you go lower. So if you go to 70 or 60% AMI, do you get additional credit, or is that the same as doing one at 180, at 120? The other thing we've explored is incorporating something for seniors, and especially in like a senior long-term facility, is if they're on Medicaid, so that somebody is paying for them, we get some credit for those units too, so that there's an incentive to provide more than just affordable at that 120 level, but maybe we can get some down at 60% AMI, and maybe we can get some other forms of housing other than just a strict rental or apartment that can account for some of that. So we would like some feedback on that. That's not something that's currently in the process. Some of the incentives in the TRO do allow for a little bit of incentive to get below the 120. I'll let Scott or Jackie speak more to that. It's there, but it's not been utilized a lot. So that's what we're, again, trying to provide the tools in the toolbox to do that.
And just to confirm publicly, so how you are calculating affordable housing matches the UDO?
Correct. It matches it.
I know you said other things, but currently you're at least there.
Correct.
You might be better based on what you said.
Yeah, if we
but
could
right now
use some
you're
of
there.
those incentives, I think we might be able to get some that was other forms of affordable units.
Yeah, they're proposing to include more things as units. So like if there were 10 Medicaid beds in a skilled facility, then that would count for them. I can't remember if
I
it's 1
0.5.
for 1 or half.
Sorry, skilled nursing facility or senior living? Because they're two very different things.
All of those.
All of
Any of
those.
those things where you were getting Medicaid beds,
Mm-hmm.
then if you had an entity that came in and said part of our residents are dedicated to that, in general terms, those are people that would also qualify as being less than 120% AMI. So we're not saying they get a full credit as a full unit, but maybe they get a half unit credit. Again, trying to provide diversity and different options that currently aren't available.
Okay. Those can change a lot, those populations, though, in a senior facility. And I think people trying to make those profitable also change what they're willing to take as Medicaid. So to rely on that to get incentives seems, I'm not sure that's a great thing to do because that can change pretty quickly, but especially in that market, which is very volatile and difficult to even sustain not in this space. So I don't know if I'd want those to count, but I understand your comments around that. But
I'm not saying that we will have a lot of them.
Yeah.
We're just looking for other ways to use
Yeah.
the PUD process to say, okay, can we get a little bit more inventive here, bring a little bit more of a benefit to the community than what is currently there?
yeah, okay, thanks.
Commissioner Seaboard?
I think a few just really quick questions, and one maybe just sticking on the affordability. And actually, Commissioner Smith's questions got me going. So it's by neighborhood, at least 15% affordable. So how does that happen if, like, let's say the first site plan comes forward and it is a 4-story condo building that's market rate? Is that possible, or does that first thing have to have at least 15% affordable?
So what we have proposed is twofold. One fold is 300 units can be built before any affordable units have to be built, so that project could come in and sort of get kick-started. We could start having some development take place. That does two things. One is it allows that to kickstart, but two, most affordable government programs have a much larger lead time. If you wanted to apply for a LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit program, through the state of Indiana, you would apply next July of 2024, and you would find out in November if you got it, and you would have to start construction by the following November. So that's a long lead time. And that would probably be like 62 units. So all of a sudden, you got 62 units. Well, how does that equate to 15% of what? So what we're doing is twofold. One is 300 units off front, and then you start have to meeting it. And then you have to make sure you're equalizing at every 250 units. So, you know, you're going to have an affordable project, and it's not going to be 15 out of 100. It's just the math's never going to work that easy, right? So it's going to be 62 affordable units, of which 32 brought your last 200 units into compliance, and now you have an extra 40 to go or whatever, you know, so you're going to play this game. So you true it up at every 250 units. You got to stay within that. And those would be platted and deed restricted at that point in time, or whatever form or mechanism we decide is the appropriate, whether it's a deed restriction or some other kind of agreement. So those would come in at that point in time. In a perfect world, we would sell 2 plots of land. One would go to an affording housing developer, and one would go to, a market rate developer, and they would start at the same time. I'm just not very optimistic that that's the way it's going to work. So that's how we're proposing to bridge that. Maybe the 215 unit or the 300 unit's not the right number, but that's where we'd love to have some feedback. But we don't think it's a one-to-one. I don't think you can build one affordable unit and one market rate unit until you get to 15, and then you get to do 85 more. That's just not realistic either.
Okay. I appreciate that there's a process to make sure we're not saving all of the affordable or something like that till the end, and who knows what happened. Okay. My next question, I think, is to staff and the concept of like locking in UDO standards. So I'm not a UDO expert, I might try to be, but so one of the standards that might be proposed to lock in is parking, and so in the one is like number of electrical charging stations per, and it's like 4%. So in 10 years, I could imagine that percent or ratio changing. But this would be locking in that potentially only 4% would be required on these mega parking garages. Is that correct as an example?
Yes.
Okay. And then another question, I actually really appreciated the cross-section slide of the building heights that was prepared, and where it shows, maybe a 4-story with setback 6-story frontage along Sudbury as opposed to the potential for a 12-story, and wanting to tear it down as it goes farther away. But does the proposed language in the ordinance require that, or is this just in concept an idea of what would be proposed?
So Jackie and I have not talked about this in detail. We can on Wednesday, but I would say that our current ordinance that's in front of you contemplates the additional step back along Sudbury. It does not, and requires it. It does not contemplate moving the greater massing on down to this, what I would call the south side of what's labeled here as Main Street. That is not contemplated making that change. That's more of how we would illustrate and believe it was done. And again, these transitional standards that we wrote were our first stab at how to document that transition. We could do it with a variety of ways. I mean, we could do it just from the property line of Arbor Ridge. We could do it with a radius from there. We could call out streets. I was looking for a mechanism that was the simplest to look at and interpret. So if we do want to codify moving the more massing on down, that piece is not included, but could be included in that traditional standards.
Great. I just appreciate the direction I think you're going in that, independent of any details.
Any other questions from commissioners? Go ahead, Commissioner Kinsey.
All right, just one more quick one. I know we want to hear from the public. The other question, there were a bunch of things in Jackie Scanlon's presentation about the number of units. I think we answered that one, but there were a couple others in the first slide you raised. One was about cul-de-sacs and whether, there are cul-de-sacs specified in the subdivision design standards, but I don't see any need or purpose of cul-de-sacs, so I'm wondering why that's included in there. And there were a bunch of other things. I don't know if we've covered everything on your list. Can the petitioner talk about the cul-de-sac issue and whether, like the why small tree plots? I think we covered that.
Sorry, yeah.
Why cul-de-sacs?
So I talked about sidewalk and tree plot widths. Again, we have done in other PUD situations where we have, they've included cross-sections. So in this example, we could include, in this case, include cross-sections in the district ordinance from the transportation plan. And then that's something we could do with that. Cul-de-sac and then alleys. In the current access table, or the current subdivision table, it doesn't require alleys anywhere, and we've talked about that a couple of times.
So alleys are only required in traditional residential subdivisions in the UDO. They are not required in the RH districts or in the commercial subdivision districts that we use in the UDO. So that was our basis of our design, was more commercial. So we have planned alleys. Billy Ponko is here, our architect, on our townhomes and single-family lots. We are planning alleys for those. The way it's done is a percentage of alleys, and so it gets a little bit more difficult to administer at this stage of what that is. But we certainly don't anticipate a lot of cul-de-sacs. Again, in most subdivisions in the UDO, cul-de-sacs are allowed. So we use the minimums of what's allowed into this to realize that we do have some environmental features. And if we're going to develop up near those, we need to be there. If we determine at some point in time that one of these streets that's a gridded is not going to go through, the result is a cul-de-sac. I mean, or we don't have a gridded pattern. So that's why we've included them in there. I think that when we look at our lengths of cul-de-sacs of being at 200 or 400 feet, that's not a really long cul-de-sac. We're not anticipating that. But we also want to make sure that as this develops out over time, that we haven't locked ourselves into something that, we can't live with or we have to come back for in the future.
I think I'd like to point out that cul-de-sacs are actually, they're only allowed in the commercial employment subdivisions that we have, which are, if you think of like the, what's that one down on Tap? Mill Creek. It's large lots that are for commercial or industrial or employment. I mean, they allow block lengths of like 1,300 feet. What we have thought this development is going to be, and based on the discussions and the drawings and stuff, and the requirement in the PUD of block perimeter maximum of 1,400 feet, that's like a downtown standard, right? So 350 feet is pretty standard for a block face in Bloomington right now. I know it was said earlier that that's small, but it's small if we're talking about suburban development, but it's not small if we're talking about urban. And if we're talking about making this area be, a little commercial node destination, then we need to be talking about urban design, and cul-de-sac isn't part of that. We did kind of leave it open and haven't made a big deal about it because we hadn't seen, kind of final roadway design, but we've seen a number of roadway designs from them now, and none of them contain those. So we would rather we don't want to include them. We only include them on the large commercial industrial subdivisions currently. And, for all the reasons I'm sure you would rather I not go into about connectivity and all of those things, we would rather see those taken out.
And I'll just follow up, as said before, Jackie and I haven't, or Jackie's team and my team have not talked about cul-de-sacs at all. I mean, that's not been our focus. So I think, let's don't get hung up on cul-de-sacs. I think we can figure that piece out.
Yeah, yes, okay.
Okay, any other questions from commissioners? Last call.
I do just want to make a comment that Commissioner Kinsey brought up, which is there's probably questions, comments in here from staff that we didn't talk about here, and I think probably some of us would have an expectation that when it comes down to it, those are worked through. I think it's just good to say that. I know some of the comments here say that it's currently being worked on, but some of them are just, ending with question marks. So to the extent that those can be addressed later with staff, that helps us out a lot.
So I think that if we haven't specifically addressed something, that's because this is the first hearing of this proposal. Even though you guys saw it a month ago, this is the first hearing. And we are continuing to work on things. Wednesday, we will meet at 10 a.m., and there will be new things that we will hear from staff, and we'll show staff new things that are based on the feedback that we're continuing to get. So because we haven't answered something, isn't that we're ignoring it. We actually have, we'll send to staff and make sure you guys have, staff may already have it, a detailed list of all the comments from the DRC meeting, staff's proposal, and last month's meeting, where we've gone through and say, working on it, solution, agree, disagree, to go right down the list. And so we will forward that to make sure staff has it and they can forward it to you, because we're trying to systematically address each of those. I mean, and I'm hopeful that staff would agree that that's the case.
Great, that's awesome, thank you. And I guess my point was that just because we haven't asked it doesn't mean we don't think about it too, or at least I'm speaking on behalf of myself. I'm sure others might agree, but thank you. Look forward to that. Appreciate it.
And if any of you have specific things, please either reach out to us directly or reach out through staff and say, hey, has this been missed? Has it been covered? You know, we want to answer those questions as well.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. One more.
Do we take final comments now? Is that what we're doing?
No.
Oh.
No. We're just questions at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Last call for questions. Questions from commissioners. Okay. We will then go to public comment. So, public comment on PUD 1823. If you are here in the chambers and you'd like to make comment, you can just step up to the podium. Make sure to state your name for the record, and then you'll have up to 5 minutes to make comment. If you are joining us online, please look for the reactions button on your Zoom software, and then raise hand. If you raise your hand virtually, we will do our best to recognize you in the order that you raised your hand, and make sure that your comments are also fed here into the chambers and into the record. So anyone would like to make public comment, please make your way to the podium.
We're friendly. You can do that.
Members of the commission, I appreciate the opportunity. My name is John Scott. I live over in Arbor Ridge. My concern is pretty much the same things I put in my letter. I've heard an awful lot of things from the developer. It sounds great. It's a little bit of pie in the sky. I think I pointed out that if you take that 136 acres, it divides down to 1/4 mile. This will be the largest project ever done in Bloomington and will set the scale for any other projects that might come along. We're talking putting roughly 15,000 people into 1/4 mile. If you look at Bloomington's population, which is 86,000, divided by about the 32 or 36 miles that the city is, it's 3,739 people per square mile. This 15,000 is on 1/4 of a square mile. If you compare it to, let's say, Indianapolis, with a population of 890,000, divided by its 361 miles, they only have a population of 2,463 in a square mile. So this project is well over a realistic. I was disappointed. The developer is still coming in and giving us nebulous figures, 4,500, 6,000. Oh, 15% might be for low income or moderate income or whatever, but it could be higher. I want concrete numbers. I want to know he's talking 3,000 units. Let's take a look at the infrastructure. We got to talk about schools. Assuming that 25% of 6,000 have 2 children, you're talking almost another 2,500 school children developed throughout the county. Take a look at Summit Elementary School. Could it take a sudden influx of 300 students? What's that going to cost the city? I don't think anybody's addressed what the overall cost of this project is going to be in the city, to picking up the cost of high roads in the future, the cost of sidewalks in the future. That's not going to be done by some association. That's going to be done by the city. The other part I think is unrealistic is that if you drive around the city and you look at this concept of mixed business and housing, most of the stores are empty. They have been empty for years, especially on the corner of 3rd Street and Patterson. And I drive through the city and you can see it. Today, coming home, I watched a fire truck try to get from 2nd Street up on Weimer Road. It bottomed out. Who's going to build Weimer Road? The city and the county, I'm only a newcomer. The old people tell me it's 20 years and they still can't figure out what they're going to do with the road. So I don't think that the long-term effects are being looked at. It's great. The other thing, PUD developments are pretty good. The plan for the PUD that the commission came up with a couple of years ago is right for the size of the area. The other issue is when you talk about mixed income per se, 50% of the communities in the country work, the other 50% don't, because you have different goals. A person who's able to pay $2,500 to be in a townhouse, his goals are different than a person who's got a hard time trying to pay $1,200 to live in an apartment. They have one set of goals for their kids, which is to get a basic education. The other person's got a goal of, I want to have advanced math, I want to have French, I want to have this. So it's very hard in that kind of a community to come up with a consensus. And what I'm trying to get at is it requires an awful lot of thought. The traffic study, it hasn't been done yet, but in 2019, 13,000 cars roughly went down Tap Road. How many more cars are going to go down Tap Road? Once, Friday morning, I tried to go from Weimer onto Tap. The 5 minutes that I was there, some 35 cars went back and forth. That's less than 5 minutes, 35 cars. That was around 8 o'clock. Try to get onto Tap Road between 7:30 and 9. Try to get onto 2nd Street from Weimer at the same time. It's a 5 to 10 minute process to get onto those two streets. So all in all, we're looking at dumping a tremendous amount of traffic, an awful lot of people, and then, again, the fire station is great, but what about a police substation? What about something having to be done probably for the school down that area? Environmentally, all the runoff, where's it going to go? It's got to come into some storage system. That probably means that the storage system on Weimer Road, or wherever it's going to tap into, has to be rebuilt, because you've got to have a lot of runoff from the sidewalks, from the driveways. And my time is up, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment? Please step up to the podium.
I just wanted to let everyone know, Commissioner Burrell had to leave, so she is gone now, just so you know. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, please state your name for the record.
Hi there, my name's Melvin Williams. Thank you for your time. I'm going to jump around because I write down notes as I think of it, because if you wait 5 minutes, I'll forget it. So anyway, but not knowing the contractors that are going to be coming in, because the developer's already stated that there'll be a different contractor, I guess, in every neighborhood, or could be, because he's going to develop one part of it, and then he's going to sell that lot to another builder. And not knowing those builders and who they are or where they come from, whether they're local or not, I would like to see a bond of $100,000 placed on each one of those, and I'll give you my reasons here in a minute. And that would be for each occurrence. The reason being is, I'm assuming, and we all know what that does, but at any rate, I'm assuming that there's going to be some kind of blasting, because there's a quarry there, or there's going to be some kind of hole ramming of rock, or there's going to be some kind of splitting of rock, or there's going to be some kind of computerized rock breaking. And whenever here's, I guess I'll give you my experience. I worked at a utility company for 38 years in construction. I built pipelines and things like that, so I know what I'm talking about. Anytime you blast, or anytime you hole ram or split rock, especially when you blast and split rock don't blow up, or it doesn't blow down, it blows out. And that's how you get it broke up. Now, the thing being is that when you do that, you're shifting rock. You're blasting it, but you're also shifting that rock to go sideways. And I live right there at the entrance, almost the entrance to Arbor Ridge. And they're going to build that street there, and you know they're going to take dirt away from that street. You know there's going to be rock there, and they're going to have to break it. And when they break it, I've seen it before, it goes sideways. It doesn't go up and down when you blast rock. So I guess, and my proposal would be that, and I don't know where this fits in your zoning or anything like that, I would like to have a synthesizer, I can't say the word, placed on each home in Arbor Ridge when they're blasting, and just leave them there, because you're moving a lot of earth, you're moving stuff. That stuff's going to shift. They've got carcasses, as they've said before, and those have to be filled and all that. So at any rate, that's what I would like to propose in order to protect my foundation and my home from either earth moving from their blasting or their rock removal or whatever. Now, that's so at any rate. Then also, you've got multiple use. I'm not, I don't know what your RH and your P is and all that stuff, but you've got multiple use, and you've got 5 neighborhoods. So why don't you zone each neighborhood as a developer or a contractor comes in to build those houses? You don't know what they're going to build, because you've got multiple use, and you might want to, and they may come up with some other type of use, some kind of other type of building. So I guess my question would be, why don't you zone each one of those neighborhoods as they come in, instead of making a multiple plan, because you're stuck with that. Once you do that, you're stuck with whatever you decide to zone that is, to make it all multiple use. Another point is that I live right along where Sudbury is going to go along, and you're going to have drainage problems because it's all going to be concrete and whatever, blacktop, it doesn't matter, but you have a drainage problem there. Well, whenever you build a road, you put a crown in it so that the water will run off to the sides and go down usually the ditches. And I guess my concern is how are they going to drain that road? Are they going to put a 6-inch drain or an 8-inch drain off before you get in the berm, so to speak, and drain that water off? How are they going to capture that water from still going down Sudbury Drive? Because it goes downhill, it don't go uphill. So,
Thank you. That's your time.
Pardon me?
Your time is up.
Okay.
Thank you for your comments.
I had one more thing, but it's okay. Thank you.
We will have opportunity for public comment, and if this is continued to the next meeting as well. So please step up. Yes, state your name for the record and give us your comments. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tamby Weichel Cassidy, and my mom, Barb, was one of the first buyers at Arbor Ridge almost 20 years ago. And she wanted to come here tonight, so I thought I'd say a few things on her behalf. Thoughtful development is the first thing that comes to mind for me. I'm glad to hear that they are considering what the neighbors think and feel, because these folks, most of them are in their senior years. It's an unintentional senior community. They're great neighbors to each other, and I'd like to see that continue into this neighborhood. I think stepping it up to 3 to 4 stories right in the back of their condos is probably not real appropriate, and maybe that could be shifted somewhere else. I mean, I see this property is going to be developed someday into something. I'm glad to see they're putting a lot of thought into it in that manner. I do have a few other concerns. One of them is Weimer Road. I know in the 2019 City of Bloomington Transportation Plan, there are comments about Weimer Road, Tap Road, 1-lane improvements that were on this target list, and I hope that you look into those. I haven't seen any of those really happen, and that's concerning. I don't think you can really depend on Adams to be your primary entrance, and I know that part of Breaking A Way is actually a private drive. It's not a city street. So these are just some comments that I wanted to share, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Vicki Walter Pollitt, and my concerns are environmental, and I'm really thankful that you're going to honor the protection of the riparian buffers, but I'm still concerned about the tree canopy. And I'm mostly concerned because I'm one of the people who uses RCA Park on a daily basis, along with a lot of other seniors and kids from across Rockport who probably can't afford to be carted around to other natural settings. And I see them playing back in the woods. And there's also a vast biodiversity in that small area. I consider it a jewel in a sinking array or a shrinking array of green spaces in this community. So my concern is that every protection be made to protect that particular piece of green. I don't know if any of you have ever walked through that area. The trees are amazing. The animals are amazing. The fungi is out of this world. It is one of the most beautiful places in this area, I think, and it's so accessible to everyone. And I'd like to just make sure that it maintains its healthy life and to remember that ecosystems don't respect property boundaries and that we don't, I hate to see it looked at that way, you know, just because you decide to make a green space on the other side of that. That's good, but I think that you need to have a clear understanding before you plan that of what's going on the other side. And I don't know, I'm not used to doing public speaking, and so I hope I made some sense. I appreciate the time. And it's really obvious to me that the Environmental Council or Commission is really interested in making sure that the environment is protected, and I appreciate that, and I wish you well. I hope that your project is something that we can all be happy with and proud of. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Thomas Landis. And I want to echo some of the sentiments that we've heard from the last two commenters. I love that you brought up this fact that the natural environment is magical. And I want to also emphasize that the built environment can and is magical as well. I want to also echo what somebody said earlier, that this is a thoughtful development. We have a group here, and as I'm listening to this project, and I spent more than a couple hours reading through the documents in advance of the meeting tonight. And what struck me is how thorough and how thoughtful the developers are in this process. Even as you hear the rhetoric that they're using when they're talking about the plan this evening, it is a rhetoric that strikes me of people who are concerned about community, people who are concerned about urban design, and mostly people who are concerned about our community, the city of Bloomington, which will continue to grow. And we need a built environment that has the capacity to honor the growth of our region, of our municipality, of our town. There have been a lot of projects that have been proposed, and I think I moved to Bloomington in 2014, and that was not long after Smallwood was developed down the road. And I think when we think of developers, we have a bad taste in our mouth because we think of a monolithic structure that has 4 walls and houses as many humans as possible for as cheap as possible. That's not the case here. That is not what development can be, and from my position, it's not what development should be. There is a magic in nature, and there is a magic in the built environment if we can harness it well, with purpose, with intention, and with a desire for something that extends beyond the pro forma, which is what most developers are looking at. And I believe, as I'm reading more about development and the possibility for urban design and community design, I believe we were going to see increasing number of developments that are designed to honor the human experience, the lived experience within the built environment. I do believe that that is possible, and I think we're going to see that, and I think we hear that from these developers tonight, and I really want to enter that into the public consciousness, and I respect that, and I really admire that. I also want to say that I know that housing is such a complex topic. It's started long ago, before any of us had any control over the context that we're operating it within right now. And there's lots of books and there's lots of thoughts about what did we do wrong when it came to zoning. We know that zoning and situations like this have been terribly exclusionary in the past. A lot of urban thinkers are now looking at density as a solution to a lot of our environmental issues and a lot of our social issues that we have seen from monolithic zoning. Single-family houses used to be the American dream. I don't believe that has to be true anymore. I don't believe that that has to be set in stone. And I think I read some comments, some letters that said, hey, we hope that you approve the previous PUD. Well, that previous PUD was, what I understand, approved in 1999. We have nearly a quarter of a century, and that PUD did not work very well for our needs. We are a growing community. I believe Bloomington is a magical community, and I believe projects like this that have intention, that have thought, that have compassion, and that have some bit of foresight can be a great opportunity for our town as we continue to grow and as people look for increasing housing options that match their needs and their life circumstances. I think density brings greater options so that way everybody can find a place to live. And it might not be the single family house. And I think across the nation, we're going to see fewer and fewer and fewer single family houses. And I think this is a very forward design. Thank you for your thoughts and your questions.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment?
My name is Vivian Furnish. I was here at the July 10th hearing. Sorry, Brad, you weren't here. Missed talking to you, but I think I got a lot of my questions across to the commission and staff. At the July 10th hearing, I questioned the density. The density question still stands. From the hearing tonight, the maximum unit numbers is 5,000, as I heard, which is still very dense. So if you follow the calculation Mr. John Scott has done, or I've done, or other people have done in their public comment, that's still over that's about 1% of our city Bloomington's land, but 10 to 15% of the future units. So it is extremely dense, unprecedented. It's on a very large site I've heard the word precedence used by Jackie, legacy. This site is humongous. So the density does not, it really doesn't sit right. It's, that's definitely a question I still want answers for. Also, the gentleman that spoke, Tom, I don't believe you can speak for everyone. And I think, but you kind of hinted that single-family home is not what Americans are looking for. I don't know if there are studies on that. I don't know if the City of Bloomington has done new housing study or public opinion research on that. We have to look at it. But Mr. Tron Enright Rudolph was asking for single-family, that map with a single-family word on it. That's from the Schmidt visioning plan. That's what I was seeing. So why is that visioning plan saying single-family home when you all are designing duplexes, triplexes, 4 to 6 story residential buildings? So that part is very confusing. Also, I disagree with you, Tom, on how the petitioners, respectively, I'm just gonna point out some facts, have respected community. So in the UDO, as Jackie has pointed out to me, I called Jackie today to confirm if my understanding was correct. My understanding was incorrect. I just wanted to point out. The UDO said for pre-submittal neighborhood meeting, it has to be with a registered neighborhood, which is only Arbor Ridge, because around the site, only Arbor Ridge is an HOA, the others are all just non-HOA single-family homes. If you truly respect community, why have you not organized the meeting for the other people? Because Arbor Ridge only, represent a small percentage at the land that intersect this site. What about the other people? What about the people on Weimar Road? What about people north of Allen, where you're suggesting your connection to Beech Tree Lane, Curry Lane, what's the other one? I can't remember, but those are all connections into Allen Street. And you know, Weimar Road and Allen Street to 2nd Street are the two worst intersections in Bloomington. Have you driven on those? I don't know if you have. And those are critical concerns. Those are elephants in the room that nobody's addressing. You're talking about you have received interest from hotels, senior living, and what's the other? Medical facilities. Do they know that those intersections are terrible? Medical facilities, senior livings, all cater towards people that with illnesses or a senior. I just can't imagine, like John Scott has talked about. It takes 5 to 10 minutes during rush hour to get onto 2nd Street or Tapp Road from Weimar and the same goes with Allen. That's just super dangerous. Are you considering those before you, advertise this? Do they even know that that's the condition of the road? Further, Jillian has asked a question about environmental issues. You said you are very sure that you have done all your research for floodplain, wetland, and riparian, but why are those information not in this speeding packet? Why can't we see it? And what are your plans for karst, slopes, trees? And in my letter to the Plan Commission, dated August 9th, this past Wednesday, I've asked about karst features. In the City of Bloomington's 2003 Environmental Resource Inventory, it has said that karst features were only studied, or the only thing that was listed in the report was surface karst features, but it has said subterranean or subsurface karst features are worthy of an investigation. Also in the same report, they're talking about a long-term study on the environmental features. And in the City of Bloomington's 2016, is that 16 comprehensive plan or 18? They've updated the previous plan because they've talked, time has changed, it's time to update and replace the previous plan. So if that warrant an update, why have we not seen a new resource inventory? Plus, it's all related topic. Okay, after the removal of the dam at Wapahani, at Weimar Lake, have they done a study on the wetland? The lake has changed into a wetland. How is that doing? The runoff, stormwater from Millennium Apartments, from Arbor Ridge, from our road, all downhill through that FEMA floodplain. If you look at the petitioner's map, thank you for providing those. I've looked at those. Weimar Road, south side of Weimar Road is a FEMA floodplain. So are you going to ensure that this is not going to make that even worse? And the stormwater, as everybody else has talked about, there was a lady that talked about RCA Park in the woods over there. It's going to affect everybody else too. So I'm just wanted to thank you for your time and attention. And I would be calling Jackie a lot more and hoping to understand this a lot better.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Come on up and state your name.
My name is Rachel Noble. I'm one of the Weimar Road people that talked to you last time. Vivian is my neighbor, and she expressed a lot of my concerns. But, Weimar Road on the 2nd Street end says no trucks for a reason. There was a weight limit on the one car at a time bridge on the other end. And I really appreciate you guys' addressing and talking about the karst I brought up and the problems. I, like Vivian, would like to know if that's going to be made public, because I would like to know that. You guys are learning a lot, but we're the neighborhoods affected by it. When they built Sudbury Road, as I told you last time, the water shears down the road and it finds that creek, which is my property. So, and then the developer, when I tried to address it, made some little drainage hits over there, but they've all filled in. And my husband tries to dig them out. So are you guys going to do drainage around those offices that are already there? I would like to see the plan, again, for Sudbury Lane Road, whatever it is, and all the new traffic. Where is all of that drainage, as you brought up, where is that drainage going? It's going into my creek, and my creek backs up. And then I would like to know that that is really, truly being addressed in this karst. I would really like to have available to the public what you guys are learning environmentally, because it does affect all of us. It affects Lake Monroe. That is water that goes to Lake Monroe. And as Vivian brought up, when they did the wetlands at Wapahani, for a long time it sheared across the road. That creek is not being cleaned out and maintained, and you guys are going to put more in there. So I would like to please ask you that you keep addressing that. And again, like Vivian said and everybody else has said, have you ever tried to be on Weimer and make a left-hand turn? The rule is, for me, is if it's after 4 o'clock, illegally cut through the apartment complex and go to the light to get out, because you can't get out. You cannot turn left. And as John Scott said, you can't turn left off of Weimer onto Tap Road. There's just times of the day you can't. So the first area that's being developed is the one that abuts Weimer Road. Shasta, is it, I believe? Where are the trucks entering? Where are the trucks taking this stuff off? On the road, Weimer Road, that says no trucks? I would really like someone to tell me, when this first development is done on the Weimer Road side, where are those trucks entering and where are they leaving with that debris? Because our road says by county, and that's the funny thing too, if you've ever been on Weimer, half of it is county and half of it's city. And we always wonder who's going to plow and who isn't going to plow and who's going to take care of the problem, because it's a divided street. So again, I really appreciate the improvements, and it does look so much more acceptable from the last time, but I really ask you to remember that some of us have been there a long time, and just like I told you last time when Twin Lakes was built, and everyone didn't listen to the environmental concerns, and a big lake now drains into what was a runoff pond, which was a little tiny creek, which is the one that goes by my house. Now there's 5 or 6 of us that were affected by that. Please, 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 in this wonderful new thing you're doing, don't forget, we're part of this neighborhood, and I really applaud Vivian, because we would be more than happy to meet with you. We would love you to do a neighborhood meeting with us, not just Arbor Ridge. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any additional comment? Please step up and say your name for the record.
We have 3 on Zoom as well when he's done, or when we're done in here, just so you know.
All right, go ahead. After this, we'll go to the online comments, but please state your name and give us your comments.
Randy Craw, Weimer Road resident. My thoughts are for strictly Weimer Road, the inability of the construction equipment to actually function on Weimer Road without causing hazardous conditions for any other driver. The width on Weimer Road is inadequate for service vehicles to pass by side. The side foliage pushes the vehicles towards the center line. If you are going from south to north, the road just cannot handle that volume of construction traffic. It's going to tear it apart. So basically, you're kind of saying we're going to take on a very large expense just with Weimer Road to support a facility to go in. I like the idea. I think what you're going to do is good, but some of it, the height elevations behind on the northeast side, way too tall. You're actually going uphill. And when you have a 6, 7-story building that you commented on, I'm going to go, that's the same as that building right across. You walk out those doors and you're looking at a 6, 7-story building. That's really uncomfortable for any other low-level homes in that area. Just wrong feel for the neighborhood. Set them much further back. We used to have twin lakes, then one lake went away, and as Rachel mentioned, that then the remaining lake had to go and absorb all of that remaining water that twin lakes used to be, so you're down to one lake. Well, unfortunately, with the new construction that has gone on, the development, there's no way the creek can handle the volume of water. So when the eutrophication happened to that retaining pond itself, the eutrophication has filled up to such a level that now when we have this torrential rains that come in, you've seen these hard storms, it fills up and nothing flat. Then that runoff comes right down the creek itself, shoots across this now floodplain. We didn't have a floodplain before, by the way, until Twin Lakes got zapped. So now the water literally cascades across multiple properties. And now if you're going to add this new complex, that's a lot of concrete, a lot of blacktop, a lot of runoff. Oh, sure, you're going to shoot it down towards the Sudbury part, but guess what? That too backs up. When everybody starts backing up, I'm sorry, it's kind of like sewer lines. It's just going to cause a problem for somebody else, and then the city and the county are going to have to do something to excavate, make larger runoff drainage capacities just to handle the runoff, because Wapahani's gone too. When Wapahani went away, guess what? The water cascaded right across the road became soft. Brand new blacktop that was down was now completely deteriorated. Money down the drain, literally. So please look at the water runoff, the construction usage on that road. Maybe consider making Weimer Road a road stub. I like the idea if you went straight down Weimer Road, you get to Harvey's new gravel driveway that was done for the tower, keep your construction traffic running straight. There's no homes or anything that's going to be bothered by the construction traffic. And you've now cut off the S curve, which is horrendous. No trucks are going to make it through that S curve with regular car traffic. So stop the road down at the end of Wapahani, make that more of a roundabout, get rid of the S curve completely, and then have the other part of Tapp Road, Weimer Road coming off of Tapp, let it go straight and be the construction path for the new construction potentially. Lots safer, and you don't have as many people when you actually dead end Weimer Road at Wapahani. That would save a lot of people time and money at that point. I think that's about it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We're going to go now to some online commenters, and then we'll come back to any additional comments here in the chambers.
Okay, Deb Peckin, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, just a second. Let me turn you up. We're quiet today for some reason.
And would you reset the timer, Jackie,
Yep.
please? Thank you.
I'm going to do one on here. So you won't, it'll be on the other screens. Okay, go ahead and state your name, and then you should be able to go.
Okay, my name is Deb Pekin. I'm a resident at Arbor Ridge, and I'd like to echo everything Vivian said and Rachel said and John said. And I have one question, and I'm not sure that I've seen this in the material. Maybe I missed it. I could have easily overlooked it. But what is a unit? What does that actually mean? Is it, what qualifies as a unit? Because 6,000 people would be kind of dense, but not too bad. But as John pointed out, 12 to 15,000 people we would be overrun in our little corner of Bloomington. It would be like putting a whole new city inside a corner of Bloomington. So I question the appropriateness of treating this as a urban development and not a suburban development. This is not the city center. This is not downtown. So why are we treating it like it's another downtown? I don't understand that point of view. I do understand the financial intent to pay for the cost of this development by increasing the number of units, whatever that means, and the people in the area. But the balance is severely out of whack for this. And I echo all of the comments of my neighbors around me. The other problem, which has also been mentioned, is Weimer Road, Tapp Road, and Allen Road. All of these are barely wide enough for two regular cars to pass. So people who are driving like a big pickup truck, it's scary if you're passing them. So, and as far as I know, Weimer is half city, half county. Tapp at that point is that city, is that county. Allen is even narrower than the others. So how can we just assume that we can increase traffic to these areas without first improving drastically all three of those arteries, main ways in and out of this neighborhood? The work has to be done to make it accessible first, not after you start building stuff. You can't create a walkable town if you don't have businesses in place where people can get jobs. So you got to do that concurrently. It's the same idea. We have to have the adjacent areas to the development taken care of before we can start being comfortable with what's being built in the development. And I understand that the Summit, that the people who bought this huge piece of land and made this huge investment are trying their best to think about how they can get it built and everybody be happy, which is a big challenge, I admit. But it's not just the development plot that we have to think about. The city is responsible for all of the adjacent areas, access, the neighborhoods, the people who live there, the safety of the roads, because boy, yeah, getting on and off Tap and Second from Weimer is a challenge on an early morning good day. And I haven't even begun to think about the water. I will also reinforce water goes everywhere. Please look at where it goes when it leaves the property, not just what you're doing within it. And I will stop there and thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you.
Ms. Brackney, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Yes, hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the time. My name is Susan Brackney. I don't live in the immediate area that this proposed development would occupy, but that doesn't mean that I would be unaffected. In fact, if you drink water, you will be affected. I'm just sort of surprised. I guess I'm just wondering what the urgency is behind all this, and what is motivating this. Yes, there is a housing crisis, and yes, we certainly need more affordable housing. It is an interesting forward-thinking design. I agree. I don't think that this is the right place for said forward-thinking design. I am somewhat concerned that the environmental commission, maybe they toured it informally or a few times, but I don't think I've seen, there was a placeholder in the packet from last time, and it seems like there's still a placeholder this time. Tell me if I'm missing something, but I would really like to have the Environmental Commission's thorough discussion of this proposal. And I'm not trying to embarrass anybody there. I know that they're shorthanded, but it's important. They exist for a reason. I would like to have their expertise. Just like we had this comprehensive environmental inventory in 2003 done by the city that's exquisite. If you haven't looked at it, I urge you to do so. And if you haven't had a chance to look through the furnishes letter in your packet completely, I urge you to take time with it. It's thoughtful. It's not filled with opinion. It's grounded in fact. This area is riddled with karst and natural springs and environmentally sensitive territory. And under normal circumstances, I would think most developers would be loath to build on such a spot. But I suspect there's a dearth of inventory left over in Bloomington with all the big tall buildings that have been going up. So now just have to eyeball what's left. Oh, this looks like a good opportunity. Karst be damned. We'll find ways around it. Everything will be fine. Never mind that we're getting more rain than ever. Climate change is a real thing. And so I'm very concerned about the quality of the watershed, the amount of runoff. And although there's this discrete boundary, I would also add that just because you dump something in a discrete boundary, you have all that karst, it will go down into all these underground cave systems and pop out in what jurisdiction, I couldn't even tell you. If you used dye and did some testing and had people with PhDs look into this, we'd know more. And if we knew more, I would feel much better. It's one thing to like what you see, and it's one thing to like what you hear, but it's a whole other thing when you have evidence to back up the decisions that you're making that are going to affect Bloomington for many decades to come, because you're setting precedents right now. Your jobs may feel a little rote, depending on how long you've been in service. But I would just remind you, I hope that you will be thoughtful and careful. This has to do with climate and you know, I guess be the change in the world you want to see. Think globally, act locally. This is an opportunity to act locally and use real caution. I guess that's pretty much what I would want to say is if you haven't spent time with the furnishes section of your packet, I urge you to do so, because there's a lot there that is going to be remaining unsaid because folks only have a 5-minute discrete amount of time, and it's hard to get all that out. I will surrender my remaining 17 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have one more online?
So however you want to.
Let's come back
Dr.
to
Chambers.
here, and then we'll do a few more here, and then we'll go back online. I want to try to get people in the order that they were waiting.
And I live on Weimer Road. And first, I'll start out and say, Viv and I are very serious. We invite you. Tell us if you're willing to get together with us, and we'll work out to get all the neighbors together on our road and north of there. I mean that, okay? And we can pull that off. We've done something like that before. So we'd really appreciate that, okay? Thank you. Think globally, act locally. She stole my line. That's how I was going to start my little talk here. That's been around. That's kind of been the catchword, the watchword for the environmental movement, certainly all of my life. So that's a half a century, and it makes sense, to come to terms that there are real big global issues, but really we can't deal with those. We can only deal with those locally. That's all we can deal with. Okay. But there's kind of a corollary to that as well, that by definition, if there is no such thing as a cookie cutter answer to big problems. They're all complex. And what I'm saying here is that if there's an environmental problem in one continent and there isn't another one, the same answer isn't going to be the same answer for both of those issues because they're so unique and particular to the local, okay? You know that. We all know that, okay? But that is not just continents. It's even different fields across town from each other. Okay, what sounds like a good answer on one may be a very terrible answer to a problem on the other side of town. All right. Okay. So let's just the elephant in the room. Let's be honest. Mayor Hamilton and the board have been pushing a density ideology to deal with climate change. Okay, and I use that term because that's been an ideology that's making the rounds now for about 10 years, and almost if you do a Google search and look on all manner of media, you can easily see that these battles are going on in every major city and small cities and everything else. There tends to be people who want to say that the way to solve climate change is density. And density of population. So if you wonder where this is coming from, this is where it's coming from, okay? And this is clearly in the city's documents. Just go to the city and look at the documents. It's right there, okay? So, but yet there's so many people in this town who don't understand that is where this is coming from, okay? You don't have to be a climate denier to have problems with that ideology, okay? I don't deny climate change, okay? But I can see a lot of problems with the density ideology, okay? And I would love to sit around and talk about that, okay? I think there needs to be a lot more discussion about this issue in this town, and I don't see much of it really, okay? I see it being pushed, and it's our way or the highway, okay? And I think that's what drove up zoning in the city. That's what's driving the annexation issue, which all of us that are, affected by it don't want it, okay? Although I confess, I don't know if density, is the answer or not. And I don't think science clearly gives us an answer, okay? It doesn't clearly give any answers. It makes hard questions more complex, largely. So, but I'm just going to say, even if density was the answer, it doesn't mean density is the answer every place you can put it, right? It couldn't possibly be the answer just in every single field that you can find. And my ultimate argument where all this is leading to is I really think this is a rotten place to put density, okay? If you look at the property, it's, a karst feature isn't just about avoiding a sinkhole, right? The sinkhole is simply a sign of a whole system underneath, all right? And you start messing with that, oh my gosh, you're going to have problems, all right? And they are going to have to break rock. I mean, if you're going to have that, you're basically creating a city. This isn't a housing tract. It's a city. They're creating a city. And so, yeah, they're going to have to put water, they're going to have to sewer, they're going to have to put all this stuff and break rock and break all that karst and have all that stuff not only roll down the hill, but it actually go down to the water. This is a serious environmental issue. This had better be really thought through serious, or this is going to be an embarrassment to this city down the road if you're not careful. So 5 seconds. You don't help the global environment if you screw up the local environment. And my fear is of doing that. So thank you very much.
Have any other public comment here in the chambers? If so, just step up to the podium, state your name. If not, we'll go back to our remaining online commenters.
Miss Wilson, Susan Wilson, you should be able to unmute.
Hello, I've been in another meeting tonight, so please excuse me if I mentioned something that was resolved by the petitioner. I've lived on Reamer Road more than 30 years. Oh, did you catch my previous amount? Did you hear what I said earlier?
Yes, you're fine. We can hear you.
Yes, please continue.
Okay. The last developer on the Sudbury property promised a lot and never really delivered it. Those of us who have been here a long time have a desire not to see that happen again. Our reservations from these projects still apply. We're not objecting to this development out of NIMBYism, but we have concerns about the runoff, the flooding, the sensitive environment, the karst topography, everything previous neighbors had mentioned. The culvert on Reamer Road has collapsed more than once, which really brought traffic on this road to a halt. I want to echo that the density is much too high, especially given the narrowness of Reamer Road. The sharp turn onto Reamer from 2nd Street, the steep curve through Wapahani, and the one-lane bridge that's closer to Woolery. These issues need to be resolved in advance of such a large-scale development. I also can't help but be dubious about how much affordable housing will actually come about from this rezone. I'd like to see a higher percentage, not less. I find the request for exceptions should not be allowed, especially for something of this density. Someone mentioned the blasting. The previous developer on the Sudbury property, I think, found out pretty quickly that drilling on the stone in this area doesn't get you very far, and they resulted to blasting. And I remembered being out in my garden and literally feeling the earth shake under my feet as all that blasting was going on. And I did wonder about what kind of structural damage that was doing to buildings in this area.
The radon that comes into your house.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what was that?
Keep going, yeah.
Yeah, and also when I listened to the previous meeting, I was struck by the talk about meeting with the neighbors. And I think only the people who live in Arbor Ridge have met with the developers. And I wondered why they didn't reach out to the people who live on Reamer Road or the people who live farther up closer to Bloomfield Road. And I just want to emphasize something one of the council members told me in the previous rezoning. They agreed that the density was too high, the flooding was a major issue, the runoff was a major issue, and especially the poor condition of Weimer Road was concerning. But he told me he was going to vote for it anyway because the developer promised a road from Adams to Weimer. That was more than 2 decades ago. We're still waiting for that road. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments.
Ms. Shonk, you should be able to unmute.
Hello, my name's Stacy Shonk. I am also an adjacent property owner on Weimer Road, and I believe most of the surrounding residents have also basically stated the main concerns that we have, mostly regarding the runoff and additional flood risk to our property that this could potentially, or most likely will potentially cause. Also, the blasting during development of this property is very concerning to us. So we would like to have some additional details with that, and would also very much welcome the opportunity to meet with the developers, with other Weimer Road and surrounding residents. Most concerned with the runoff and additional flooding risks to the property, especially along those of us along Weimer Road. And I believe they have already stated the concerns. So thank you very much for the time.
Thank you.
Let me just check my messages. Okay, we had one more, but he didn't send the message, so I think we're done on Zoom.
Okay, if you are on Zoom and you still would like to make public comment, again, just look for that reactions button and click the raise hand button, or send a chat message to Ms. Scanlon, and we will do our best to recognize you. And again, if there's anyone else here in the chambers who'd like to make comment, now's the time. Please just step up to the podium and state your name. Last call for public comment.
Good thing to put it on the agenda first.
Is that the vote is the first one? They're still going?
Okay. I don't think that was intended to be public
I
comment,
did
but
receive
we
one
thank you for
message,
it.
sorry.
Got one more?
Yes, Mr. Sam Dove sent a message that says, I saw flooding risk on the street and I saw flooding with heavy rains. He wanted me to read that into the record. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll come back now to the commission for any additional questions or comments or a motion. Go ahead, Commissioner Enright Randolph.
So yeah, I didn't make a comment earlier, just had a question. It'll be great to get those slides whenever we get a chance. This goes back to the first time this was presented, and actually it goes along with one of our public commenters. We need a breakdown of what type of units. I feel like units just in itself is a little vague, you know, options to buy, you know, commercial space, single-family dwellings, you know. This really goes with, you know, the triggers and the phasing. I had, you know, asked if maybe we could get more detail on that. We just have the same figure. So I'm still at a loss. Also, I mentioned that we need a PUD that is predictable. And that was actually quoted several times by the petitioner. I think they very well know the predictability of what they're proposing, but I don't think we know the predictability. It has to work both ways. Also, I'm very happy that we're going to protect our floodplain and our riparian buffer. There's been a lot of attention brought to those. I'm going to just kind of cite something real quick. It's from the Local Technology Assistant Program, the necessary for updating local development standards. Basically, it talks about having a non-adverse impact on our floodplains and the costs that the city or other developers have to bear to replace any kind of taking of that floodplain. There's a very nice ordinance in Hamilton County that discusses this in detail if we're ever looking at what we need to do to be proactive of protecting our floodplains, not just in this particular situation, but across the city. Also, and this, I don't want to take this away from anyone, but it was mentioned a couple of different times about the watershed. We're actually in the lower Salt Creek watershed in this development, so it doesn't actually necessarily drain into Lake Monroe. Not saying that some of it might not carry down there, but I'm really big on branding our watersheds, so people kind of are familiar with the impact in their particular area. In this development, it's the lower Salt Creek. Again, I'm going just to emphasize that it needs to be predictable on both sides, and I'm still at a loss over here. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments? Commissioner Kinsey, go ahead.
Yes, I want to take up the frequent comment by the public about Adams and Weimer roads and the challenges of traffic and flooding of those roads and the width of those roads in particular and safety issues. So I noticed in the packet we haven't really talked much about the images that appear on pages 13 and 14 of our packet, and I wonder if it would be helpful to talk through those issues about traffic. And I'm intrigued by some of the creative suggestions from some of the public about dead-ending Weimer Road at Wapahani and if that's even a viable option, or to think about how the road could be widened and what the options and who would do that, and whether there have been conversations with the county about Adams. So I think there's a whole, there are a batch of issues and questions that were raised in the packet around those roads that I think would help the public also understand what the plans are. So whatever we can do to get more specific about how Weimer and ideas for discussions with Adams, that's part owned by the county, and there's just a lot there that I think we could help people feel better about or address some of those concerns if they were done a little bit more thoughtfully to respond to those questions. So I don't know if that's something to put on the staff or petitioners just to have some more discussions about that topic, but given the predominance of that as a concern that the residents nearby have and people driving in that area, we have to see more on this. So that's one thing I want to at least get out there for next week's or next month's meeting, if not before.
Commissioner St. John.
I would echo those comments. It's just trying to understand, I know for myself, just trying to understand the process of that. I feel like somewhere along the way there was a conversation that the roads are developed later once there's and really you know more about this, Commissioner Seaboard, but just to understand that process where roads are improved because of density and need and traffic problems and all of that. So, yes. And the second thing is that karst topography, of which I do not pretend to be an expert, it keeps getting brought up, and so I don't think the public maybe understands that enough. Maybe the statements were accurate about this site, but maybe they aren't. I'm not suggesting they aren't. I just don't know. And so I think for someone to actually give that a little more attention would be great, because that is brought up repeatedly by people who live there and people who know a lot environmentally. And then the third thing is, I think you have to go meet with the other neighbors. So that seems like something you should definitely do before you get this all done. The neighbors that aren't in Arbor Ridge.
Commissioner Seaboard?
Yeah, I appreciate some of the steps the development team has taken thus far, and also know that there's been ongoing discussions on a lot of fronts on this project and anticipate those to continue. I guess just speaking in a little bit to the transportation elements, I know that they are working on formulating a traffic impact study that would study the existing conditions of a large part of the transportation network in the area, in addition to the development's potential impact to that, so we can understand it. And so they've been coordinating with city staff on that, and so that will be a forthcoming thing that will be a part of the discussion as this project moves forward. Likewise, I know they're communicating with CBU on other utility impacts, and there's a lot of, I guess, just information that's still forthcoming. Coordination, I would say, is actively happening, and so it's just hard to get too much into specifics right now, but just know that is happening. And I think just to maybe echo all of the comments thus far is I think in the staff report, it mentions a lot of really good questions and dialogue. And so I think certainly happy to continue this in another meeting. Not exactly sure if that's a continuation of the first or second. I just personally there's so much to this. I think there's probably a couple more meetings to be discussing this, just to be honest. But just looking forward to continuing it and for additional information to be forthcoming.
Thanks. Commissioner Smith.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to the idea that it's an ongoing process, that you're going to take all this information and still work it and keep working on it and have subsequent meetings, because I know, the people living near need kind of this ongoing dialogue to kind of understand what's going on. So do I, and at some point it'll come before council, and I know that working through all these issues and kind of honing and refining it is really great. So thank you very much for doing that.
Any other questions or comments? Anybody have a motion? So as a reminder, the staff recommendation was that we forward this to the September meeting.
Yes.
I'm not sure we have to label this as a second or a third hearing. I think it's pretty clear that we will have had at least 2 hearings on this if we do indeed continue
the threshold
forward
with
this.
the 2.
Yeah.
If we continue it, Mr. Rooker.
Yeah, for clarity, you might just say you're going to go ahead and forward this to the second hearing.
Just-
You may recall, I went back and watched the tape from the last meeting. We had just a few seconds to make the motion last meeting. We're going to hit 9:30.
So it wasn't clear if we,
Quick, and it was merely continuing, so there's a little ambiguity about
all right.
this is the first hearing and the second hearing.
So let's just assume this was a continuation of the first hearing, and I think the appropriate motion would be to forward this to a second hearing at our September meeting.
And I just want to clarify for the public and everyone that doesn't mean that doesn't mean it's the last meeting just because it's the second hearing. We have to determine that next month.
Yes. At the next meeting, commissioners will be free to make a motion to forward or continue to another one if we think there are still unresolved issues. So is anyone prepared to make a motion?
One more request for the next time we gather to talk about this. And it's to talk a little bit about a couple things that were raised today that I don't think were adequately covered. One is the Schmidt plan discussion and where that stands and what influence that has at all, if any. And the second is about, I realize I'm super impressed with the public's investment in understanding all this, and particularly several of you who have really gone additional miles to study this. I'm super impressed. But I also wonder if we could help everybody move forward with some of the questions and understandings, if we could talk a little bit about, again, the difference between a PUD and zoning for each neighborhood, just to get that set so we have an understanding of why one and not the other. And then a little bit about what the difference is between site plan approval and then that clarity of when there might be a variance, how a variance might be used. I think we kind of got that settled, but I just wonder if we could work ourselves into a better, more productive conversation if we could cover some of those basic details about how this works. I mean, this to me is a real process element. And when we get to a 15-year or more process, I think those things are really important to understand how they affect the development moving forward. So anything we can do to help all of us understand the timeline and with such a large time horizon, how this will work. Thank you.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I think it seems like there may be some some public perception that this is it, this is just a one and done kind of approval. So it might be good in the next presentation to just talk about how, what the opportunity for public input and public meetings will be as we look at individual site plans and as this would get built out. Still looking for that motion. Or more comment?
No, I was going to make a motion.
Oh, please do.
Yep. So, and Mr. Rooker can help me if I do this wrong, but I motion that we move PUD-18-23 to a second hearing or meeting? Does it
Hearing.
matter? Great. Second.
So the motion is that we're going to forward PUD 18-23 to a second hearing at our September meeting. Correct?
Yes.
All right.
Correct, that's September 11th.
Any final comments before we call the roll on that motion?
I actually do have a final comment, which I made at the last meeting at this time, which is that I really appreciate the public input. It's thoughtful, intelligent, it's respectful, it's insightful, and I think it's just really commendable that you all are out here. I understand why you're out here and you're passionate, it's about where you live, but the way you conduct yourself is really admirable, and I just want to show my appreciation for that. And equally, I do feel that the development team that's here, I understand there's economic gain here, so there is incentive, but you all really do exhibit a willingness to work this process and make adjustments, and I look forward to seeing how those adjustments progress as we move along. So thank you, and to staff too, because this is sort of like doing a mini UDO all over again, and so it's a lot. And so I do appreciate the work that the staff has done, and Ms. Scanlon as well, and Mr. Rooker and Mr. Robinson. Thanks.
Thank you. I think we're ready to call the roll.
Okay, motion is to forward the petition to the second hearing at the September Plan Commission meeting on September 11th. Cockrum?
Yes.
Ko-Radke?
Yes.
Kinsey?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
St. John?
Yes.
Whistler?
Yes.
Ballard?
Yes.
And Seaboard?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, that motion passes, and we will be back here in a month to hear this once again. Thank you all for your time. We do have one more petition on the agenda this evening. Feel free to stick around. May not be as fun as this one, but we do have one more, and that is ZO-29-23. That's the text amendments to the UDO. And we have, once again, Jackie Scanlon to present.
Here I am. Okay. All right, as President Whistler said, we are looking at ZO 2923. This is an amendment proposal. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
We're
yeah.
missing this screen up here.
I don't know why that fourth one's out, but
There's a lot of people.
there's no air in here tonight. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Let me see if I can zoom in on this. So this is the memo that was in your packet, ZO 2923. When we did the annual update in the spring of 23, one of the things that we took out for further review was amending the regulation related to first floor non-residential downtown required space. And so this is us bringing that back as Plan Commission asked us to do. So the current regulation with the proposed amendment in bold is listed here on your screen. So the proposed amendment would allow a reduced non-residential square footage requirement if the incentives are utilized in the development. And then, okay, so I'm going to read the language. And this is located in 2003-010 E1. Non-residential ground floor standards. A minimum of 50% of the total ground floor area of a building located along each street frontage identified by a black line in Figure 48 shall be occupied by non-residential primary uses listed in Table 3-1 as permitted or conditional in the MD zoning district. as those permitted or conditional uses are modified by those prohibited uses listed in subsection 2 below. And then this is the new portion. If the incentives listed in 2004-110 are approved, the minimum percentage shall be reduced to 30%. At no time shall the required non-residential use occupy less than 1,500 square feet of said ground floor area. And then this part already exists. Enclosed parking garages shall not be counted toward the required non-residential use. When we met previously, staff had done a survey of the blocks here in black and found a very low vacancy rate of the commercial spaces, but we did propose this amendment tied to the incentives as a way to start the discussion, as Plan Commission was interested in discussing whether or not to change the regulation. So I can answer any questions. For those that don't know, text amendment, the Plan Commission would be making a recommendation to council, who would make the ultimate decision. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Do we have any questions? Commissioner Cochran.
The second sentence, at no time shall the requirement of be less than, can you explain that a little bit more, what you're thinking?
Sure. So I think the thinking was for a smaller building, the viability of commercial use, that 1,500 square feet is viable size in most places along the mapped area. And so that if for some reason the building was going to be smaller, where 30% of the ground floor is going to be less than 1,500, they couldn't go less than 1,500. So it's a minimum for everyone, whether they use the incentives or not.
Okay.
Commissioner St. John.
So, Ms. Scanlon, you said that you did a survey of those blocks and found, did you say a low? What did you say?
Yes, I said a low vacancy rate, and
Low
I'm sorry,
vacancy.
I have it somewhere, and we discussed it, but I don't have the exact number tonight, but I can look that up, or we could continue this, and I could give it to you next month. We just did a walking survey, so, just staff doing the miles there, and then when we had the special session to discuss this and the parking maximums is when we talked about it, and it was very low. And then it was interesting because I think it was less than 10 spaces, and I can try to see if I have it here. And then it was interesting because some of the people who were in the meeting of you all who have expertise knew of some of those locations where they were just being sat on. It wasn't that they couldn't be filled, it was that particular owners chose not to, or for other reasons like that. Meaning we did that because we were trying to figure out, changing that regulation, is there an impetus to do that? Is there a reason to do it? Or is the 50% working? We felt like the 50% was working, but because this body asked us to propose something else, we decided to go ahead and reduce slightly if tied to incentives.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Oh, Commissioner Kinsey, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know how you arrived at a reduced to 30%. If you can explain a little bit more, did you debate slightly less than 50% or?
I think we tried to look at some downtown developments and areas of commercial on their ground floors that seemed like they were working or could work, that were smaller or less than 50%. So 30 seemed like a reasonable, when we were having those discussions, seemed like a reasonable amount. And then again, with having the minimum, not to be able to go below 1,500.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So just looking at some of like our typical downtown lot sizes of existing things that could, potentially redeveloped that aren't in our historic districts, and choosing from there.
Yeah, I guess I would wonder then how many, I suppose this suggests the next question is, how many would this affect if it were reduced to 30%? Then, not that people would change what they have now, but what would that really alter?
I think it would be redevelopment, right? So as we're seeing things redevelop, if they're using incentives, then they could have smaller commercial than than they would be required otherwise. I
But
would
I-
say most of our downtown developments are going to use incentives. It's hard because since we've changed the sustainable development incentives to basically require more because we came to you and said we thought maybe the threshold was too low. So a number of the developments that we have seen proposed or built are under the old. So it's hard to predict whether or not people will use incentives, but they may, if they're actually more interested in residential space than commercial, they may do that to be able to increase their non-commercial space.
Thank you.
And I can bring you, I'm sorry, the packet is thin. I can send you that information from the stuff we did. This is a 2-hearing process, so we will come back in September. I don't believe we requested a waiver of second hearing for this petition. I'm looking at the legal. Mike, does that sound wrong to you?
I don't remember, Jackie.
Yeah, I'm looking at the legal and it's not in there. So I think we're planning to come twice. So I can send you that information that we discussed at that special session. I may be using the wrong term, for you to review again if you want to decide whether or not to do the amendment.
Can you review the incentives again? I mean, just maybe a synopsis of what are those incentives?
So in this instance, you could do the affordable housing incentives. So 30% of units at a certain AMI or lower in perpetuity. And you get, for example, additional stories. Or you can do the sustainability incentives. There's a list of 6, and you have to do them all. So it's related to like green or vegetated or solar roof, or vegetated or white roof, solar, some kind of parking requirements of having a certain percentage of your parking covered. So different regulations like that, and you basically have to build them into the building. In some cases, you may not be able to do that, so there's a second option for green incentives, where if you can't, for whatever reason on your site, you can't meet those 6, you can seek certification from something like Green Building Council or other recognized groups. And if you get that, then you can also get incentives. And again, that is, while there are some related to setbacks and things, it's typically additional stories that we see people using the incentives for. So if you were doing a redevelopment downtown and you were using either the affordable housing or sustainable incentive to get additional stories, then this regulation would also allow you to reduce your commercial space on the first floor from 50 to 30%.
So if they meet these requirements, I mean, and they say they want additional stories, but they also want to take advantage of this, could they do that all in
Yes,
one?
it's both.
Any other questions?
I guess I'm also interested in the, we asked the staff to examine this issue or consider it. So for me, there's also a concern of, among this body, what do we think about? Is this really achieving the concerns that were expressed when we talk about the vacancy in downtown, particularly space, and whether we want to see more use of incentives to reduce the percentage of non-residential? I mean, is this achieving what we hope?
I think it gives commercial development, I think there's more flexibility. I think, to me, that's what this allows for. And I think we need that in terms of the commercial, the repurposing of the redevelopment moving forward in the next 2 to 3 years, just in the commercial space, especially retail office, and how repurposing, I think, is going to be, kind of a part of some of the vacancy issues that commercial real estate is already starting to be impacted, and that's, from what I've seen and read and researched, going to trickle out. It's hitting major metropolitan areas significantly right now. And so I see it as it gives an incentive of flexibility for the repurposing of some of those areas, some of those spaces, which is a good thing, in my opinion.
I have a comment. Is it comment time? It's not really, or since we are
It's
effectively?
supposed to be question time.
It is
So let's
question
try to
time.
keep it to questions.
Yep. So
I
my-
suspect we're going to go to public comment and then quickly
Yes.
come back for comments here, but let's.
So I'll have a question. So just to confirm then, Ms. Scanlon, if we go to a second meeting, you will bring the data that supports your comment that there's a very low vacancy
Yes.
rate in these areas. Thank you.
Any other questions? Nope. Okay, we will then go to public comment on ZO 29-23. If you are here in the chambers and would like to make comment, just step right up to the podium, state your name, and give us your comments. If you are online, click on that reactions button, click on the raise hand option, and we will try to recognize you in the order that you have raised your virtual hand.
And I'm sorry that I missed the first part of this. Somebody pulled me out and we were chatting about the previous proposal. I am very curious by what we're talking about here. And I like your comments, Commissioner Ballard, about adding flexibility to our commercial space. I want to say what I said earlier. I really like Bloomington. I think this is a great city. I moved here in 2014, and I casually, like armchair, you know, not an armchair economist in this situation, but public input, individual, the UDO and everything. That was all coming about when I was beginning to become interested in real estate as a social and economic driver, and I saw how it can be powerful in people's lives. And from a super amateur perspective, I think some areas of the UDO have restricted and constrained possibilities and potentials for what can be built in the community. And so if we're talking about giving more flexibility in more spaces, as I was hearing the last part of this comment section, I was thinking of the Village Deli redevelopment program. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. It's probably more than 50% commercial on the first floor. But I think that holding any new project to any type of very rigid expectation and requirement, it limits the potential and it limits the capacity for impact, and it limits the viability for people's lived experience in that built environment. And so I think the market is wise because it's anonymous. And I think in our downtown area, the market is showing us, we don't need all that commercial space that's there. I don't know if that contradicts what one of the staff reports was just now, but I do see a lot of vacancies in those required commercial buildings, especially on South Walnut. There's a small apartment building that still has stickers on the sides of the windows like they were brand new windows, but they've been built for 3 or 4 years now. And I don't think there's anybody that's going to move into that first floor commercial space. What does that do? That raises rents. What does that do to affordability in this town? It makes it less and less and less viable for those members of our community who need it the most. And so I'm definitely want to speak in favor of anything that gives more flexibility and listens more acutely to what the market is asking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Last call for public comment. All right, we are then back to the commission for any final comments or a motion.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Someone just raised their hand after you said no more public comment. Just a second.
Just in time.
You should be able to unmute Mr. Lloyd.
I'm sorry. I thought I had raised my hand.
Oh, you're all right. Just a sec. Let me turn you up.
Well, thank you for allowing me to comment remotely. I appreciate the flexibility. As someone who has over the years worked tirelessly on revising the UDO, I believe that revisiting these types of things is something that I think everybody who worked on these had always envisioned that, we're going to see from time to time that things change in our community, or that just parts of the ordinances just conflict in a way that we didn't imagine it. And I think this is one of those areas. And I appreciate the Plan Commission for being proactive to consider this. As a downtown property owner, and one that frequents our downtown retail all the time, as my office is actually located above the CVS. There's no better advocate for a healthy, vibrant downtown than myself. And I think when we look at sort of the 5,000 versus 3,000, and then now attaching some sort of incentive to get it, I just reiterate to the Plan Commission, it is hard enough to develop downtown. When you look at all the other development at the Kmart side, or some of the other larger student housing developments, where the amount of density you're given in sort of more of like either greenfield or sort of redevelopment, it is a challenge to want to continually put your money downtown and be an investor downtown. And so for most of us, the retail space it's usually not a huge economic driver. Yes, I think it's important for us to have vibrant storefronts, but the square footage is debatable. And there's nothing that staff has presented, there's nothing that I see where there's any magic formula for what size of square footage makes for a viable business. At the end of the day, as an investor, we want viable businesses, whether that's in a 500 square foot space or whether it's in an 8,000 square foot space. And that's kind of where the economics drive this. So I would ask that we consider ways that we can still have flexibility. What we did previously was we might have things such as a conditional use. And it seems to me that rethinking about how we can make it easier to develop downtown and not ways that make it more burdensome to develop downtown is sort of what we could accomplish with this. And it seems to me an easy solution to at least ponder in this instance is just in this little overlay area. I mean, I'd almost rather you keep it at 5,000 and say anything less than that is a conditional use, and then have a body such as you that represents the community, elected officials, boards, everything, make a decision about whether or not the project merits it. Now everything goes to the BZA for consideration, and maybe that's where it's appropriate. But it seems to me that we've lost flexibility with the Plan Commission as representatives of our communities and all of our constituents to at least consider whether or not whatever is being proposed fits in for whatever reasons that might be given. It seems like this is one of those topics that we're constantly somebody comes with their square peg and we're always constantly trying to pound it into a round hole. And it just doesn't always fit. And so I think that rather than having it set up where I've got to establish incentives, I'm incented. I'm trying to invest in downtown. So how about encourage us as real estate investors to invest in downtown and make this so that there's at least some flexibility that is tied to something that is realistic, whether it's market economics or whatever. But rather than us just sort of making up what it is that we think is viable, it seems to me it would behoove us to have a board such as the Plan Commission actually consider the whole of this and determine whether or not whatever square footage is being presented is viable and is good for the community. I like that kind of flexibility, and we used to have some of that. I feel like we swung totally the other way when we did the revisions to the UDO, and I'd like to see more discretion with the Plan Commission to look at each of these. If you look at this grid of buildings, we have so many different buildings. We've got a handful of vacant lots, so it's not one size fits all. And I'd ask you to consider that as you move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. This time, really last call for public comment. Anyone else? Okay, back to the commission and Commissioner Cochran.
So what was the reasoning behind tying the incentives instead of just lowering the requirement?
Well, I think, again, based on the conversation we had at the previous meeting about this topic, there is, it's interesting to hear Mr. Lloyd say we haven't shown anything because we haven't seen anything that indicates this is an actual problem, like something that Mr. Whistler said about another issue we were discussing. We're looking for we're trying, I'm not going to say it right. It's the thing, I'm so tired. It's the thing where you're looking for a problem.
Solution in search of a problem?
Thank you. We're proposing a solution in search of a problem. What is the problem? We looked around and there aren't downtown vacancies, so why are we reducing the area so that those uses that can go into those spaces are now limited? Like you can't put in you can't put in as big of a restaurant in a space that you otherwise could. Who is that helping in the community? It's helping the developer be able to tailor what they are wanting to do, but it's not necessarily the goals of the comprehensive plan of the downtown, vibrancy. So I would say that based on our previous discussions, some members of the commission did want to see something else proposed. So one thing that we felt was still fair toward the goals of the community is that, okay, if you're willing to do an incentive toward, a more sustainable built environment or homes for people who can't afford them, then maybe a reduction is appropriate in those cases.
My thought is, in the retail environment as today, rents are lowering. I just signed 3 leases that are pretty, to me, below market rent in order to get them in this area. It's becoming less as an investment opportunity and more as an amenity to the building. I think developers would like to see retail. They want a vibrant downtown, but it's less of a square footage that's going to support the building. And so that's some of the challenges you run into.
Definitely. And we discussed this at Board of Zoning Appeals with a developer, wasn't building downtown, building on South Walnut. And, I think he readily said, it's basically he wants to charge a certain amount and he can't fill it at that amount. Well, that's not really a UDO issue. If the market isn't going to support the amount you want, then maybe you're charging too much for where you are. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a real estate professional and you are, so maybe what I'm saying sounds ridiculous. But for us, our goals are to have the downtown be vibrant, and one way that we know works for that is not allowing residential right there on the first floor. And we also know that if we denude basically these commercial spaces and make them so small that only a vape shop or other uses that don't need a lot of background space, kitchens and things like that, that isn't necessarily toward the goals of what we're looking for either. So we're trying, as we always are with everything, to balance the goals of having viability and people who can actually develop downtown and help make it vibrant, and then also having it be vibrant for the people who spend time down there. So in this way we felt like if the percentage was less, we would still be working towards some of those goals in the comprehensive plan. But yeah, we're open, of course, if other people have drafts or other ideas of what they'd like to do, that's what the discussion's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I do want a vibrant downtown. The challenge is behind the scenes when you're running the numbers, it's not just the market, it's the cost of material, the cost of land, the cost of financing. It makes it hard to just even develop a property. Many times these developers don't even break even until 2 or 3 years after it's done. And so we're trying to encourage people to renovate and or build new buildings. It just, again, trying to pull hindrances off of them and hurdles and try to find things that encourage them or incentives to encourage them to invest in our downtown.
For sure. And I think so the other side is at what cost? How far do we go to say is our only priority getting new buildings, then we should just take it out and just let them all be apartment complexes? Because that's what that's the market. Of the little that I know about the market, that's what the market is here. And so when Mr. Lloyd is talking about variances, he means waivers, and the Plan Commission used to do waivers. And you can see buildings all over town. I could tell you the addresses and they'd pop in your head where the Plan Commission worked with the developer and said, oh, if you can do commercial here, please do it, and if you can't, do it residential, and they're all residential. Because and it makes sense, I understand why they're doing that, but that's why we have to write the regulation to guarantee something. You all have to decide what that something is, if the 50% is to, if the situation of the community is changing enough that the 50% isn't working, then we have to decide, what to change it to, basically. So this is our proposal, and we understand that it might change, of course, and we're happy to help figure out how to do that.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Comments? Motions? Commissioner St. John, go ahead.
Well, I can do both. I do have comments. I can also motion. Usually we motion, then we comment.
I have one question.
Yeah, question?
Okay, one more question. I'm a little uncertain about the incentives and whether this is going to help us achieve what we want is some flexibility. And I wonder if any other considerations were given to either other approaches, and I guess I mean making things, I guess it would be conditional, or what else could there be? Was there anything else considered instead of the incentive?
Yeah, other things we talked about were strict square footage requirement. So that is, applicable. That applies differently based on the size of the building, of course. Mm-hmm. And yes, we could explore conditional use as well. That is an option. So
public art. I mean, I don't know, some contribution.
Sure. Yes.
Is that another option? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any of those things could be written in. I mean, it's basically whatever, your all's consensus is to make the recommendation to council. We felt like, incentives is kind of already baked into the UDO and something that we're trying to encourage people to do. And if it is accurate that people are trying, to do less than the 50% in these areas, that maybe this would also be an incentive to use the incentives and get the other incentives as well.
I guess that's the other way to look at it, is this could help increase the incentives. So this could be both ways. This could go both ways.
And I can have for you next month as well, but I do believe, basically, first of all, it's not the entire city, it's not even the entire downtown, it's just those areas in the figure that I showed earlier. And of development we've seen in those areas, many of them use incentives anyway. So this would be it would be like a reverse, where this would be baked in for them to use as an option because they want extra height or, an extra floor. And so they use the sustainable or affordable incentives to get that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment. I think this is a step in the right direction. I like kind of the formula here. I think is a little bit more reasonable, right? Reduce it to 30%, but put a minimum on that. I think that's kind of a reasonable approach. Frankly, I'm not sure that tying it to the incentives is really necessary. I think we're like, there seems to be this idea that we really have to make sure that it's hard to put residential uses on the ground floor, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's really important that we encourage retail and windows that make the streetscape walkable. But if you can fit some units in behind that, or if you fit more parking in behind that, that's not visible from the street, I don't think we need anything in the code that to discourage that. I have no problem with that. I don't think that only helps build more housing stock. And so I'm just, again, it's a step in the right direction. It's not exactly what I would have done. I think I would just do something like this without tying it to the incentives. I'm kind of inclined to support it just because it is a step in the right direction, but I'd really prefer that we just reduce the requirement and without strings attached. So that's my take. Commissioner St. John.
Yeah, so I do have a comment. I do wholly believe this is a solution in search of a problem. I don't think the data supports a change. The vacancy rate, hopefully we will see, is the occupancy rate is very high. It's a core part of downtown. There have been, just looking at these streets, there have been so many new buildings that have gone up here in the last 5 years. So people are building, and if they're building and the retail space is occupied, I don't see the problem with how it is now. I do see a problem with changing it, in my opinion. I think it would be a mistake. No one goes downtown to walk by apartment doors or lobby entries of apartment buildings. They don't. It's boring. There's no activity. There's no way for them to engage unless they know someone who lives there. So I very much do not support a change in this. I think we're throwing around the word flexibility for developers, and it sounds good, but I don't think it's needed. I don't think they're struggling. And there's a lot of area outside of this that can be developed, but this is really, really core downtown. And I think we all agree we want a vibrant downtown. And to me, this speaks exactly to diminishing the vibrancy downtown by removing space where the public can engage. So I won't be supporting this, but I will be supporting that we have a second hearing because I would actually like to see the data on the survey that was done. So if it's appropriate, I'll make a motion now, or I can wait. Do we motion to take this to a second meeting, or it's just required?
Oh, no, it's not required here.
It is required, but you do need a motion to continue to.
Or second hearing is required.
Yes, we didn't request waiver of second hearing for this petition.
Gotcha.
Which we sometimes do with
So
text
the appropriate
amendments.
motion would be to, just to forward this to a second hearing at the September meeting.
Which I'm happy to do, if we're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay, I motion that we forward case ZO-29-23 to a second hearing at the September meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any final comment before we call the roll? Commissioner Cochran.
So I do think there's still some opportunity to develop in the downtown. And in this next month, I will look at those properties. It's few, but there is some opportunities, and see how this would affect it, or even our current code. Just to look at, because even there's a certain amount of square footage that's just hard to lease, even if it's in the downtown area. It just makes it so I'd like to know that number, and I'll do that research myself, but I'd also like to know some more numbers too. So that's all.
Commissioner Enright Randolph.
I wasn't sure if I was going to weigh in, but I decided to. I think it's very, very important that we do incremental changes, because if we jump the gun, it's going to be a lot harder to work backwards and try to, provide the space that's already required. So to Mr. Whistler's point, it might be a step in the right direction, but I think we should be very cautious and take very incremental steps.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I know everyone wants to leave, and we have to shortly. But I actually had it here in my handy D&D notebook from Blue's Clues. 278 spaces that we looked at, and 16 were vacant. And when we did that, and so I have more detailed information, but that's what we talked about when we met in March. I thought it was in the summer, but it wasn't. And at that time, some of the comments were that there were a lot of retail on the market right now. The issue is, that this is a very particular area, and it's not. And we know that there's a lot of retail, but not necessarily in this location. So anyway, I'll look and you'll recall I made a map where I highlighted what the 16 were, and then we discussed what they were. So we could get that to you as well. Sorry. Thanks for your patience on that.
Thank you. Any final comments? All right, let's call the roll.
Thank you. The motion is to forward the petition to second hearing in September. Ko-Rodke?
Yes.
Kinsey?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
St. John?
Yes.
Whistler?
Yes.
Ballard?
Yes.
Seaboard?
Yes.
And Cochran?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
All right, that motion carries, and that concludes our agenda for this evening. Any final announcements before we adjourn? All right, we're
Thank you.
adjourned. See you in September.